Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the second part of What If Deku was trapped in GLaDOS's lab? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Aizawa didn't end up getting back until well into the night. He hung up his coat and started unraveling his capture weapon when he heard laughter coming from the room at the end of the hall. Midoriya's room. He quietly slid up to the door, not wanting to alert whoever was laughing to his presence. Hisashi had texted him not too long before he left UA. The message was long to say the least. It seemed as though Midoriya was quite torn up about how he had behaved, according to the blonde. He felt bad about how he spoke to the boy, but he knew that leaping into the vacuum of space was irrational and stupid. Even for Midoriya. He felt guiltier and guiltier the more he thought about their argument. He was aware, somewhere in the recesses of his mind, that he had a tendency of changing the subject when it came to Aperture, but there was more than one reason for that. Obviously, he didn't like the idea of Midoriya reliving the apparent torture he lived through. Upon thinking about it, he realized he knew next to nothing about Aperture aside from the turret and the tech that was forced onto the young boy. Surely the company wasn't all bad. Surely there was more to the story. He just hadn't been willing to hear it. Aizawa mentally kicked himself for disregarding the boy's feelings. Another reason? The amount of heroes that died during the raid. He would never tell Midoriya the actual number of hero casualties, simply because he knew the boy would blame himself for each and every one of them. The death toll had hit nearly 50 fully fledged professionals, not to mention the thousands of people in the facility that the young pro had sensed. To that day, he didn't know what happened to those trapped souls. Had they survived? There was no way to tell. The facility had bombed seconds after himself, and Midoriya had gotten out. When he left for Japan, the place was still smoldering. He hadn't received any updates of any kind, so one could only assume the worst. The other main reason? Aizawa was in the facility for mere seconds, and the whole experience still haunted him. Aperture Science, he later found out was the name, was completely unknown. There were no government records of the facility. The only information that could be found of it were old newspaper clippings and the odd few patents, and most recently, the story of the explosion going off in the middle of nowhere in Michigan. That giant robot that had been behind Midoriya, suspended from the ceiling, terrified him. It had spoke with a booming robotic female voice and Midoriya had called it GLaDOS. She was intimidating to a fault. She tried to kill both himself and Midoriya with a neurotoxin. The facility itself tried to kill them by self-destructing. Everything about it was so distinctly wrong. And yet, he turned his head toward the door once more. Wheatley, how the hell did you manage to piss GLaDOS off that fast? Wheatley? Midoriya was laughing. He briefly noted that it was the first time he'd heard the boy laugh in a while. You see, okay, so I was under the rather genius impression that she wouldn't be able to understand what I was saying if I said it in a funky accent. And clearly, it didn't work. Like at all. Immediately saw through me she did. Chell and I made a mad dash for it. Aizawa heard Hisashi laugh along with them. He sighed. Izuku, why don't you have any funny stories like that? Izuku? Since when were the two of them on a first-name basis? Oh, shut it. GLaDOS was so pissed after Chell got out that she didn't even tell me what personality cores were. You think she and I exchanged gossip over tea? I'm insulted, Hisashi. Aizawa listened silently as they burst into giggles. Deciding to make his presence known, he shuffled in front of the door and knocking twice. The laughter stuttered to a halt. He pushed the twinge of hurt down. Come in. He took a breath as he pushed the door ajar. Hey, I just got back. I figured I'd make myself known. The kid was looking at him. If he was still angry with him, it didn't show on his face. His eyes flickered from Midoriya to Hisashi and finally landed on the ball Midoriya had pulled from a portal. Wow, you've got a fine head of hair, haven't you? Which was speaking. Thanks. The blue eye of the new robot shifted between the two on the bed and himself. Midoriya himself had turned away, lying back across Hisashi's legs. Rhett's single red eye pierced through him. So, Midoriya, I was wondering if I could speak to you about earlier? Said boy turned to him once more, seemingly examining him for something. He blinked twice and nodded. Go ahead. Aizawa took a breath. I'm sorry. I reacted poorly because I was scared. I still don't think you should have leapt out like that, but I suppose, considering the circumstances, anyway, I am sorry. And I will apologize to the class tomorrow. They were very curious about you after you'd left. Midoriya looked up at that. Look, I'm sorry if I made you feel like I didn't care. I'm worried for you, but I know that doesn't make it okay. I'll try to be better. Midoriya quirked a small, vulnerable smile. He sat up from his spot across the blond man's legs. I'm sorry too. I can't imagine how it must have been from your end. Sorry for scaring you, but I don't regret it. I saved my new friend Wheatley. He speaks English. He turned to the sphere. Ah, is that my cue? I'm so sorry, I actually wasn't paying attention. So yeah. Hello. I'm Wheatley. Aizawa. Rhett beeped. Aizawa made eye contact with Hisashi, who was smiling sweetly at him. He shimmied off Midoriya's bed and clapped his hands once he was on his feet. Okay, so how about dinner? I'm thinking takeout as a treat. Midoriya was slipping. No, he'd slipped. He was falling. There was manic laughter echoing all around the artificial, stark, white walls of the Aperture Science elevator shaft he was plummeting down. The halls and opening were racing past him as the filtered air tore through his hair. How did he get here? He lifted his hand to shoot a portal. Only, that wasn't his portal gun. This was one of the older models. One of the handheld devices, not the literal hand devices. In the back of his mind, he vaguely noticed the outline of something falling next to him. He lifted his other hand, the one not occupied by the heavy portal gun, up to his head. Grasping at the hair, he pulled it down to his eye level. First off, his hair shouldn't be that smooth. Second off, brown? Instead of curly, dark green hair, he was staring blankly at longer, straight, brown locks. How bizarre. He turned towards the direction of the sound. He couldn't hear it clearly. His head felt like it was full of cotton. Wait, it was the thing he'd seen falling. It was a potato? Yes, a potato with a curious yellow light. How are you doing because I'm a potato? That voice. GLaDOS? He kept falling, only he could now see the dark floor at the end of the tunnel. And he was rapidly falling towards it. Could you maybe take off one of those Aperture Science long fall boots and stick me in it? Just be sure to land on one foot. But he blinked his eyes open, seeing the potato being carried off by a pigeon? What even? Midoriya opened his eyes in his room. And by his, he meant Aizawa and Hisashi's spare bedroom. He blinked the sleep from his eyes, lifting his hands to look at them. Nope, still fake. The familiar white of his cybernetic hands twinkled in the early morning light. In his dream, he'd felt her hair. He'd felt the weight of the portal gun, the cool rush of air. The feeling of touch, fleeting as he woke up more and more. How long would it take for him to forget that feeling completely? His mood was dropping already. He looked around his room briefly, his eyes pausing on both Rhett and Wheatley individually. That was weird. He had been a girl. That was the most notable thing. The second was that he had the original portal gun. As in, the model he'd used up until GLaDOS decided to upgrade him. And what was with the falling? He started as he pondered the contents of the dream. GLaDOS' voice coming from a potato. His mind flung him through his memories, back to his first conversation with Wheatley. What was it he said? Even putting her in a potato wasn't a match for them. What the hell? He pushed his blanket aside and stood up, quickly throwing on his uniform. Wilty, are you awake? The blue light flickered to life as Midoriya shuffled around his room. The eye roamed around momentarily before settling on him again. Oh yeah, I'm up and at 'em. Absolutely pumped about being back on Earth. It's mad, space was fun or whatever, but gravity. I never thought I'd miss gravity. Mad, I'm telling you. Midoriya raised an eyebrow at the core, smiling. Great, good to know. I'm heading to school soon, but would you mind if I brought you as well? I'm hoping Hatsum will be able to clean you up a bit, Or make it a bit easier for me to carry you around? Oh, not a problem. No problem at all, I have no preference, to be honest. Just, whatever you need, I'm glad to help out. Midoriya picked Wheatley up by his handles and ran to the kitchen. Aizawa was downing his second mug full of espresso when Midoriya placed Wheatley down on the counter. Morning, Fit. Midoriya threw him a smile. Good morning, sunshine. Sleep well? Aizawa snorted. Nope, I have to explain to my students, whom I wanted to intimidate, that yelling at you was irrational and irresponsible of me. I just hope they still hold some shred of respect for me after I grovel for their forgiveness. The boy rolled his eyes playfully. You're so dramatic. I'm sure they will still be terrified of you. I can act scared if you think that'll sell it. He chugged some juice and swallowed a few mouthfuls of one of Hisashi's favorite American cereals. He'd probably cry when they ran out, but Midoriya was in a bit of a rush. Plus, they were delicious. Come on, I'm driving you today. He was knocking on the door of the support labs 10 minutes before class, just as he had hoped. He wanted to drop Wheatley off with Hatsum, and hopefully she'd be able to help him out. Power Loader pushed open the heavy, metal doors. Here for Hatsum? She told me all about your conversation yesterday. Midoriya's heart dropped out of his chest. She told him? What did she tell him? Had she actually understood anything I said to Wheatley? But she hadn't reacted, unless she was just very good at hiding her true motivations. Oh damn it. How screwed am I? Very cool tech you've got. I hope you made use of the costume designers for the hero course. Come on in, I'll get her. Oh. He sighed heavily. Mostly in relief, but a little in disappointment with himself. He could tell she hadn't been malicious in any way. She had actually been really friendly, considering that he was a complete stranger asking her to take time out of her day to fix a robot he never explained the origin of truthfully. He followed Power Loader into the labs, already seeing Hatsum from across the room. It was hard not to see her when she was attached to the ceiling. Literally. She lit up when she saw him. Hey, Greenie's back. Detaching herself from the ceiling, somehow, she landed on the floor in front of him. She tugged off her mechanical belt, flinging it onto an already sizable pile of babies. So, what can I help you with? So, I brought Wheatley in again because I was wondering if you could help me with something. It's kind of hard carrying him around like this all the time. Do you think there's anything you could do to help? I can pay you back for it. Plus, you can have some pretty interesting conversations with him. Hatsum made grabby hands at Wheatley, placing him down on her workspace. He could use a clean as well. Maybe tighten a screw here or there. Some polish and bam. He'll be good as new. As for mobility, I'm sure I could come up with something by the end of the day. Be back after class and I'll show off what I've done, I promise. She held out her little finger to him, her massive welding gloves making her hands deceptively large. Midoriya linked pinkies with her, snickering at her antics. She shook their linked fingers back and forth. Her eyes landed on his hand. She looked at it for a second too long. He started to squirm a little in her hold. Midoriya tried to subtly separate their hands. Okay, I'll be back later. See you? He sped out of the labs, ignoring the looks from both Hatsum and Power Loader. He began walking to his classroom, feeling rather dejected. Of course she was going to be intrigued by his hands. She's a support student in UA. She wants to design support gear for a living, of course she'll be curious. Don't overthink it. Midoriya? The green-haired boy stalled in his tracks. Shinso? The purple-haired insomniac was standing a few paces in front of him. Hey, how are you? I was going to text you after yesterday, but I didn't want to freak you out or anything. Midoriya waved his hands in front of him nervously. Oh no, not at all, I'd appreciate anything. I'm fine, why do you ask? Shinso looked at him like he was crazy. Aizawa yelled at you in front of everyone because you teleported yourself into space. Midoriya's sweat dropped. That was a bit of a misunderstanding. And Aizawa apologized, so I'm good. Shinso still looked concerned. Are you sure you're okay? No, why do you ask? They blinked at each other. The purple-haired boy rolled his eyes, smiling. All right, but if he makes any cracks at you today, I'll make him regret it. I find that hard to believe. Shinso smirked. Bet? The two strolled to Class 1A, with plenty of time before class was supposed to start. He hadn't been as delayed with Hatsum as he'd expected. But, he thought, I did kind of run out of there. So, did Uraraka or Ida message you? Midoriya looked at him curiously. No? I mean, I don't think so. Let me check. He pulled his phone from his bag, holding the power button when nothing happened. Oh shit, it's dead. I never even noticed. Shinso gave him a sympathetic look. Dang, that sucks. You could ask Kaminari, he was the one with the electricity quirk. I saw him charging. Jiru? I think that's her name. He was charging her phone. Midoriya nodded appraisingly. He must have a lot of control over it if he can charge a phone without frying it. I saw him use his electricity briefly yesterday, and he seems to have a pretty large amount of power he can work with. I wonder if he has any practical moves yet. We're here. Midoriya snapped out of his trance. Shinso was holding the door handle, ready to open it, with an amused look on his face. Oh, sorry, I got a bit lost in thought there. Don't apologize, it's interesting. Midoriya smiled softly as Shinso pushed open the door, letting him walk in first. Midoriya. Oops. Maybe he should have charged his phone. Uraraka practically tackled him as he entered the classroom. What was that yesterday? You leapt into space. It was so cool. Midoriya tried to smile as she shook him back and forth by the shoulders. Thanks. I thought I'd build off what you did to get a good score. That gave her pause. She looked pleasantly surprised. Oh, I inspired you to do that? How did you think to do it? Midoriya scratched his neck as Shinso laughed at him. Ida was staring at him with his arms crossed. Ida? You all right, buddy? He strode forward with the elegance of a dressage pony. Don't buddy me, that was extremely dangerous. The health implications of the vacuum of space alone should have been enough for you to know what you did was self-destructive. If something had gone wrong, you could have died. Midoriya looked away. He hated disappointing people. And his friends? Even more so. I'm sorry, Ida. I wasn't thinking straight. I can assure you, I won't be doing that again. I acted rashly and I'm sorry for scaring you. Ida deflated at the apology. I shouldn't have yelled, Midoriya. You just caught me off guard. And then you didn't answer my text messages. Uraraka chimed in. Yeah. I even tried calling you and nothing. What happened? Midoriya smiled awkwardly. I didn't realize my phone was dead, sorry. They both seemed placated by the admission. Midoriya glanced around the room in passing. Everyone was staring at him. The redhead, Kirishima, sprung up from his seat, slamming his hands on his desk. Dude, your performance yesterday was so manly. More voices chimed in with other such praise. Midoriya instantly blushed a violent shade of red. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. It was très magnifique, mon ami. The sparkly boy was patting him on the shoulder. Yeah, it looked super cool too. That portal was so powerful. A pink girl was bouncing in front of him. Oh, yeah, they are pretty strong, I guess. Kaminari's voice joined the cacophony. Yeah, dude, you really got to show off your skills. I'm pretty sure it's what we're all curious about. Huh, said Blonde through an arm around his shoulders. Did you really open a portal to the moon? Midoriya noticed the class were watching on in anticipation of his answer. Even the half-and-half boy, Todoroki was his name, was staring at him with an intensity he wasn't expecting. Yeah, I did. It was kind of a bad idea, but I'm still glad I did it. Whoa, that's so cool, dude. It's no surprise you got 5th overall. Midoriya perked up. Wait, really? Kirishima showed off his blinding smile. Hell yeah, dude, it was so manly and cool. I'm amazed by your control. Midoriya internally, reluctantly thanked GLaDOS for making the portal gun so easy to operate. Reluctantly. The door to the class slammed open, Aizawa looking like death at the door. Everyone, including himself, immediately dashed to their seats. 3 seconds. An improvement, but not good enough yet. The mood of the class dropped spectacularly. Before we begin today, I would like to apologize to Midoriya, and by extension, the rest of you. I behaved irrationally and improperly yesterday. You surprised me, and I wasn't expecting to be surprised by my students. I shouldn't have yelled. Kaminari made the fatal mistake of speaking. Looks like Mr. Scary over here has a big ol' heart. Aizawa's head snapped over to him so fast Midoriya practically got second-hand whiplash. His eyes glowed a dangerous red as his hair floated up. Kaminari instantly shrank. Are you mocking me for apologizing? Even though it was phrased as one, it wasn't a question. Nope, not at all. Sorry, sensei, it won't happen again. Midoriya smiled to himself. Aizawa was rough around the edges, but he was a big softy. He could see it at home, with how he treated Chonk, and how him and Hisashi interacted so naturally with each other despite their opposite personalities. Even with himself. While he wasn't great at listening, he cared deeply about Midoriya's well-being. He hadn't even known him that long yet. Greenie, you'll be shocked and awed by my new babies, I swear it's genius. Midoriya shrunk into his collar a bit, smiling. Hatsum was a very touchy-feely person, but Midoriya found he didn't mind. He hadn't had much physical affection since moving into Hisashi and Aizawa's, but he wasn't about to ask them. Hatsum was friendly, and liked to constantly be touching and fiddling with things around her. That included him. She threw an arm around his shoulders as she led him over to her workspace. He could see Wheatley sitting casually among a mixed group of technology. He couldn't tell what any of it did from a glance, but knowing Hatsum, some of it was definitely over the top. And possibly explosive. Okay, Wheatley, said Robot flickered to life, turning in their direction. Hiya, how are we? I'm doing grand. This lovely lass has been very accommodating, very much so. Yeah, I'm very comfortable. Very happy, glad to report. Midoriya blanched. Wheatley, you speak Japanese? Hatsum perked up next to him. Hell yeah, he does. I had a look under the hood, and wow. There were 200 different language options in his code. This little guy has some of the most detailed and complex programming I've ever seen. It was amazing just seeing it, and all the data came together and just works. It's amazing that Aperture had such powerful technology so long ago. Oh man, what I wouldn't give to see the rest of what they created. You know, they could have boosted our technology by decades. Midoriya sweated through his undershirt as she went on about how brilliant Aperture was. Yeah, he thought, because they used humans to test their killer tech. It's a miracle I don't have permanent brain damage. Anyway, let me show you what I've created. Wheatley perked up where he was sitting. Hatsum picked up a cylinder about the size of his forearm. To begin, this is a prototype. It's not finished yet, but I'm excited about it. It's essentially a drone. I had a look at Wheatley's coding, and it's so versatile I think I could upload him to this. You could have him flying around, helping you in battles and stuff. Midoriya looked on in awe as she clicked a button on the top of the drone. It extended with little propellers sticking out at both ends. She passed it to him to inspect as she picked up the next thing. This is a pair of glasses. It's more like a visor, but it has similar features to the drone. I'm thinking of connecting them together so that this little guy could be flying around, and the video feed would show up on the visor. It's a long way off, but I think I can handle it. Wheatley blinked happily at them. Amazing, isn't it? This fleshy here would have impressed even Aperture's finest engineers. I mean, one day to create all this. Imagine how much she could do with a portal gun. Midoriya whipped his head to Wheatley, making a chopping motion at his neck. Hatsum, unfortunately, heard him. Portal gun? Oh, that is insane. Aperture had functioning portal guns? How did they work? Wheatley glanced between them quickly. Well, I'm not sure if I should say, really. I'm no engineer, plus I only really saw the gun myself once. Twice. Well, it was all in the span of a day or two. I certainly was up close and personal with it though. I'm not sure exactly how it worked, but I'm sure there was something to do with the moon. Maybe moon phases or something. Well no, that wouldn't make any sense, would it? Sorry. Hatsum chucked to herself. Don't worry about it. If it's been done once, it can be done again. And I will be the genius to recreate it. Midoriya watched in silent agony. One wrong word and he would be revealed. One thoughtless comment and his big life-changing secret would be revealed. So why was he so unsure of himself? He wanted someone to know. Did he? Yeah. He did. He wanted someone he could talk to, other than Hisashi and Aizawa. He cared about them, but they worried about him too much. They never paid much attention to the tech, not really. Hisashi had expressed interest, but not much past that. Hatsum loved technology. It was her life and her future. She had decided to dedicate her genius to creating for others. Could he trust her to keep it a secret? She wasn't exactly the quiet type. He also didn't want her to ask him a million questions. He hadn't known her that long, yet he felt close with her, but that was more because she was so open about things. Does he? Doesn't he? Greenie. He snapped out of his thoughts to see both Hatsum and Wheatley staring at him. Oh, sorry, I was distracted. Hatsum smiled and waved it off. No problem, dude. I was just about to show you the last thing I have 100% ready. I'm pretty sure it'll work fine. She picked up what looked like a USB, but smaller. May I have your phone for a moment? Curious, he obliged, handing it over. She gingerly clicked the USB into the charger port. It made a quiet beep when it connected, and his screen lit up with Hatsum's logo. It was a detailed H with cross hatches, colored in vibrant shades of pink, the same as her hair. Okay, I'll give that a second to load. Basically, I made a copy of Wheatley's code and transferred it onto this USB I created for this very purpose. His code is surprisingly compact considering its detail. Anyway, the USB will upload Wheatley onto your phone, so you can talk to him wherever you go. Oh, Hatsum, that is incredible. You did this over the course of one school day? She glowed with pride as he watched his phone gradually turn on again. I'm really happy with it. I don't have a lot of opportunities to work with code, so, thanks. Midoriya accepted the hug she engulfed him in. Maybe he should tell her. He squeezed her back with equal strength. She would be kind about it. She released him, patting his shoulder. So, what do I owe you? She grinned. Nothing. I made it all with UA equipment. As a support student, I have access to as much as I need. Instead, you can talk up my genius inventions to your classmates and use what I make for you. He grinned back at her. She reached to place Wheatley back into his arms. By the way, what is your quirk? I'd love to make you some quirk-specific gear. I assume it has to do with your hands? Midoriya looked down at Wheatley, nestled in his arms. His arms. The ones he was given. Given? The arms that were forced on him. They weren't his. His had been ripped from him. His chest ached at the memory of the gammy surgical equipment. He was itching to feel his skin. He knew he wouldn't be happy with what he felt. These weren't his arms. His hands. His fingers. They never were. He couldn't tell her. Not yet. Next time, I promise. I don't want you making stuff for just me. There are so many other students that need your babies. She quirked a lopsided smile, raising an eyebrow. All right, next time. She raised a fist to him. He bumped hers happily. Everyone, please escort to the meeting grounds at once. Ida was chopping his hands enthusiastically in the boys' changing room. Midoriya pulled on the last part of his costume. His costume was something he had absolutely no idea about when he applied for UA. In fact, it had slipped his mind until the night the final submissions were due. He had been sitting at the table, leaning over a blank sheet for the better part of an hour, trying to come up with something he wouldn't mind wearing. It was a difficult task, considering all he had to go off was the superheroes he'd seen in comics and movies before Aperture, and Hisashi and Aizawa's hero costumes. The two men were no help, unfortunately. Make sure it's hella flashy. You want people to recognize you from your look alone. Make it low-key. If you're too recognizable, you'll be easier for villains to pick out. It should be bold, dramatic, and with flair. No, it should be functional. What good would capes and cloaks be for a kid who uses portals? The two had bickered back and forth while he had struggled to come up with anything. He was aware he would have the opportunity to update his costume as he grew both in age and in power, but he wanted to start off strong. Unfortunately, that was extremely hard to do, because he had terrible fashion sense. Midoriya. We must go at once. He shot up, following Ida out of the changing room. In the end, he'd gone with something comfortable and, he hoped, functional. It was a loose green hoodie that tucked into skin-tight, black tracksuit pants that cut off at the knee, where his cybernetic met his flesh. He also had some small hidden pockets in his hoodie for things like medical supplies and maybe flashbangs, but he hadn't gotten approval for the latter yet. The tracksuit had blue and orange triangles curved around the seams up his thighs. He'd requested strong fabric, so it wouldn't tear or snag, and was hopefully fireproof. God knows GLaDOS liked setting him on fire at every opportunity for science. He was never badly burned, but he was still aware that it could happen. The last thing he wasn't sure about yet were his legs. His feet had been turned into Aperture Science's long fall boots, and he could extend them at will for maximum shock absorption. Normally, he kept them as close to normal feet as he could, both so he could wear shoes and so he could pretend he still had feet. He figured it made the most sense to let them extend to their full size, which ironically made him a few inches taller. He bumped shoulders with Ida as they walked into the open air of the UA grounds. The rest of the class had gathered already, and he looked around curiously at everyone's costumes. Some were eye-catching, like Aoyama's and Ajui's. Some were more practical, like Bakugu's and Ishido's. Speaking of Bakugu, the guy was decked out like a soldier, with the boots and the massive grenade on his wrists. So, presumably some form of explosive quirk. Or misdirection. Midoriya. Your costume looks so cool. He turns to Uraraka, who was approaching him slowly with Shinso. Thanks. You both look so professional, it's so cool. Shinso was dressed similarly to Aizawa. It was a simple, muted purple tracksuit with a fabric mask hanging over one ear. Uraraka looked a little uncomfortable. Yeah, mine is a bit tighter than I'd wanted. Plus, my boots are heels. I've never walked in heels, and to be honest, I don't really know what I'm doing. Midoriya was taken aback a little. Before he could say anything, however, All Might grabbed all of their attention. Greetings, students. You all look legit in your costumes. You have made the first step to becoming fully fledged pros. Now, before we begin, there has been a slight change. Midnight will be joining us for your training session. Said pro strutted out in front of the students, stopping next to All Might. Yes, well, it wasn't decided until about 30 minutes ago. Your teacher just thought this class might go a little smoother with a more experienced teacher present. I am only here to observe and make sure nothing gets out of hand. Midoriya smiled as Midnight caught his eye. She sent him a subtle nod. Now, before we begin, I'd like to have a look at all of your costumes. I am usually the one Nedza gets to help when it comes to hero stuff like names and interviews. So I know what works and what doesn't. Allow me to give you my professional opinion. She made her way around, throwing out compliments and praise as she went. If she spent a little extra time with Midoriya, nobody seemed to notice. Stopping at Uraraka next, she sized up her overall look. It's quite cute, easy on the eyes. A little tighter than I'd expect from someone with a gravity quirk, but maybe I've been spending too much time with 13. Uraraka looked up at her pensively. Midnight? I actually am a little uncomfortable. Her attitude immediately changed. Oh, what is it? The girl hesitated again. It's just, like you said, it's tight. I don't remember if I specified on my design, but I didn't want it to be skin tight. Midnight placed her hand on her chin. Well, we can get that fixed for you. Of course, it might take a day or two. Anything else? Uraraka startled. That's it? I can just change it? Midnight smiled at her warmly. Of course, my dear. I had a very bad costume when I was your age, and while I just got used to it, it never sat right with me that I couldn't get a replacement. So when Nedzu offered me a teaching job, I made sure to get all the info. If you're unhappy with how the designer handled your costume, the support department will fix it up in no time at all. So, is there anything else? Uraraka sniffed, smiling wetly. Thank you, Midnight-sensei. Actually, my boots are heels, but I wanted them this big so they could absorb any shock I'd feel from falling from a height. Do you think they could fix that as well? Why, of course. While I'm at it, girls? May I have your attention for a moment? The other girls in the class gathered around Midnight. So I was just made aware that one of the students is unhappy with their costume. I'd like to let you all know we can submit them for changes today, with absolutely no trouble. If you would like to make any changes, please let me know and I will handle it. Of course, you can find me on your own if you would like more privacy. Yayorozu took a step forward. She was visibly nervous. I would like to change my costume. When I was designing it, I didn't think it would be quite so revealing. Do you think I could speak to someone with more specific requests? Midnight nodded immediately. Of course. I will let Power Loader know as soon as the exercise starts. Anyone else? Hagakure stepped forward as well, though it wasn't very obvious. I think I made a mistake with my costume. I refract light, so wearing clothes would give my position away. But I'm naked? Other than the gloves and boots. Do you think there's anything they could do for me? I'm sure someone has been working on something like that. I will inquire into it for you. Anyone else? When no one made a move, Midnight nodded, reminding them that they could approach her whenever they wanted to about changes. She waved to All Might, who then commanded the attention of the students once again. All right, everyone, I will now draw the names. Remember, this is a heroes versus villains training exercise. Do not hold back, but I will alert you if you need to take it down a notch. Let's begin. In the end, Midoriya was in a group with Uraraka as heroes, and they were up against Kaminari and Bakugo as villains. The latter didn't seem too pleased to be against him. Midoriya wasn't sure what his issue was. He'd been giving him a wide berth, in case he upset him. He still felt terrible about his classmate passing. He felt even worse that he'd been a bit of a dick to him at first. But he apologized. Bakugo was glaring at him as he and Kaminari made their way inside with the bomb. Uraraka turned to him, much more energetic than she'd been before. So, what's the plan? Midoriya pondered the question for a few seconds. Well, I don't know what it is about Bakugo, but he has some issue with me. We met twice before coming to UA, and neither were in particularly good circumstances. He'll probably go for me, so you should try and find the bomb, if you're okay with that. Sounds good. What about Kaminari? I'm not sure. I haven't seen enough of him yet to predict how he'll behave. Bakugo will probably leave him immediately, so he'll either stay with the bomb or follow him. Uraraka smiled. So I'll take out Kaminari and get the bomb while you distract Bakugo. They bumped fists. All Might sounded the siren, alerting them that the exercise was starting. We probably shouldn't go in the same way. Midoriya turned to her. She was looking at the windows above. I should go in through one of the upper windows and start looking for the bomb. I doubt they'd keep it on the first floor. Midoriya nodded, and they parted ways. He stepped through the open door, glancing around quickly. The dark, plain hallways were eerily reminiscent of Aperture. He tried not to think of GLaDOS as he took a right. Out of curiosity, he cast a portal on the wall next to him. To his relief, it landed. He closed it again, continuing down the hall. He kept his footsteps silent as he turned the corner. Still no one in sight. He tapped his intercom, quickly and quietly checking in with Uraraka. Hey, anything on your end yet? His comm buzzed with white noise for a second. Uraraka's voice returned in a whisper shout. Hey. No, nothing yet. I did hear Bakugo when I first got in. From the sounds of it, you were right. He's looking for you, so be careful. Midoriya cursed internally. Copy, check in again soon. Why was Bakugo gunning for him? He'd said he was sorry, and the blonde had said it was fine. He had brushed Midoriya off. Was he still pissed? It's not like the guy was openly ableist since the sludge villain. Although, Bakugo had completely avoided him on the first day, even though he'd been picking a fight with Ida. The second the blonde saw him, it was like the fight in him just vanished. Looking back, that's probably something quite alarming. Or is it? He sighed. It weirded him out how much socializing had changed. It wasn't something that he should have noticed. In reality, it wasn't even as severe a change as it was in his head, but people were just open. They talked about everything and anything to whomever was willing to listen. He thought, briefly, about his fight with Aizawa. The man had been so forthcoming about his own misconceptions and mistakes. It was refreshing. Different. The same with Inko Ida, Uraraka and Shinso. They were so much more comfortable with him than he'd expected, especially considering he hadn't known any of them for that long. His mind paused at Inko. He'd been meaning to visit her again. They spoke when he got his results, and it was lovely, but he wanted to see her again. Maybe he'd ask Aizawa after school today. His earpiece flickered to life. Midoriya. I found the bomb, and Kaminari is here. He's guarding it, I think. I can't see Bakugo anywhere, so he might be getting closer to you. I'll try and take out Kaminari. Midoriya leaned around the next turn, focusing for the sound of anything out of the ordinary. Copy, be careful. He has a strong quirk, try not to get too close. He took the stairs to the next floor. His gut twisted. Looking around, he spotted an almost unnoticeable trail of stirred-up dust. Was that from their initial entry into the building, or has Bakugo been here recently? He slipped around the corner, keeping his breathing silent. Finally, he heard something. Footsteps, angry ones. Bakugo was approaching him. He twisted, casting a portal at the end of the hallway, and stepped through one directly behind him. He closed the portals after him. The footsteps stalled. I know you're there, come out and fight me, you coward. He rolled his eyes. Bakugo was shouting more threats. Midoriya tapped on his comm, not saying anything, but hoping it was sensitive enough for Uraraka to hear Bakugo's muffled yells. Be careful. Her voice was practically a breath, it was so quiet. He stood up, preparing to move again. His plan was to distract Bakugo as much as possible, but he had a sneaking suspicion it wouldn't work out the way he was hoping. Said boy appeared around the corner he was standing by. In an instant he threw more portals, and he was putting plenty of distance between them, but not quick enough that he didn't feel the wave of heat at the oncoming explosion. It was eerily reminiscent of Aperture's bombs. Put it out of your mind. Get in the zone. Bakugo was screaming insults at him as Midoriya dashed around in a massive circle. When Bakugo got close, he would slip to the staircase, and the cycle would begin anew. Midoriya knew he probably wouldn't be able to beat him in close contact, considering Bakugo had explosives at his disposal. He leapt around the bend, dive rolling away from the hostile boy. What? Are you too scared to fight me? I'm actually trying this fun thing where I don't get burned. So far it's going great. Bakugo growled. He seemed feral almost. His eyes were clouded over. Midoriya hesitated. Bakugo blasted him in the side. Ow fuck. He slammed into the wall, pushing himself up again. He subtly tried to grab the capture tape All Might had given the hero team for the exercise, but Bakugo sent another blast his way, distracting him. He threw a convenient pile of stones and rocks, presumably from the construction of the building, at Bakugo's face. One thing that Aizawa had taught him in their little sessions was this. When fighting an opponent that could physically beat you in combat, play dirty. The boy tried to shield his eyes from the dust and sharp edges, and Midoriya flung his leg in a wide arc, landing a powerful kick across the other's face. Bakugo stumbled back, clutching his nose. He glared up at him from under his bangs. Why don't you just fuck off and let me beat you? Midoriya dropped into a stronger fighting stance. Well, come and get it. The two dove for each other, kicking and pushing from both sides. Bakugo slammed his shoulders against the cold concrete of the floor. He was pushing against him so hard it probably should have hurt, if he had any feeling in his shoulders. The blonde was panting, partially from exertion. Midoriya couldn't tell what the other part was. Suddenly he laughed. He laughed, a sad and bitter thing that gave Midoriya pause. A hand slammed down on his face, pushing him into the floor again. Fucker, I win. I told you I would win. Now let me crush you like the ant you are. Bakugo raised his left arm slowly, tugging at the gauntlet on his right forearm. It clicked. Midoriya's eyes widened. A pin. On a grenade. Oh, SE. All Might's voice boomed over their comms, but Bakugo either didn't notice, or was ignoring it. Young Bakugo, you mustn't fire that from such close range. You'll injure Midoriya more than you think you will. Bakugo, stop, you'll kill him. He wrapped a finger around the pin. Midoriya thrashed, trying to throw him off, but he had his head in a vice-like grip. There was a manic, twisted smile on his face, but his eyes were far away. He tugged the pin. As if in slow motion, Midoriya threw two portals and he fell out from under Bakugo. The portal shut just as Bakugo's supercharged explosion went off. As the final sparks flickered out, Midoriya braced himself on a wall behind Bakugo. He was breathing heavily. What the fuck? Were you trying to cook me? In the back of his mind, he was aware that he probably shouldn't be screaming at the clearly unstable boy, but God, he was about to be history. Literally. He stomped over to Bakugo, who was still kneeling in place, unmoving, unblinking. Bakugo stumbled to his feet, taking a few steps away from him, but Midoriya didn't let him slip away. Bakugo! What the hell were you doing? He wasn't looking at him. Midoriya watched as his hands twitched and flexed. Bakugo took 2 long strides toward him, and he prepared to be punched. To his surprise, Bakugo yanked his capture tape off of him, wrapped it around his own neck, and walked out. Midoriya watched him go. What? Is he okay? He just went from trying to fry me like an egg to handing me the win. What the hell was that about? I am so out of practice when it comes to other people and their emotions being a factor in trials. At least GLaDOS was open to conversation while trying to kill him. Oriya. He started, throwing his hand to his calm. Why yeah? Are you okay? What was that? The whole building just shook. Midoriya brushed himself off. I'm not sure. Are you okay? What about Kaminari? I'm fine. Kaminari is still guarding the bomb. Neither of us can fight if we can't get close, so we've been staring each other down for way too long. When I find them, I throw rocks at him. Midoriya chuckled, trying to calm his racing heart. I'll be up in a second. He sprinted up 2 flights of stairs, using his portals to speed up. He dashed into the room where the noise was coming from. As he entered, he saw Kaminari throwing the rocks back at Uraraka. They were both clearly getting frustrated at the lack of progress on both sides. He ran around to the other side of Kaminari, so he and Uraraka surrounded him. Oh, it's... Midoriya smiled at him. Kaminari chucked his last rock at Uraraka and made a mad sprint for Midoriya, hoping to get close enough to land a proper hit. Midoriya ducked back, but not out of the yellow blonde's range. He watched as Uraraka quite literally flew for the bomb, reaching out with arms and legs. Kaminari's electricity charged up as he threw out his arm. Fuck. He was surrounded in blinding light for a full 3 seconds. Then came the pain. He was spasming, his hands curled in on themselves, and he was on the ground. He could feel the energy tearing through the tech embedded into his body. He was clawing at his head, trying desperately to stop the pain. And then there was black. Midoriya was aware of the movement around him. Someone was talking. Frantically. God, he was tired. He wrenched his eyes open, looking at the commotion going on through hooded eyes. Kaminari seemed to be freaking out. And pointing at him. What had happened? Oh, oitre. Bakugo tried to fry me and Kaminari did fry me. He flexed his hands. They responded slower than normal. Fucking wonderful. Wait, he's awake. Midoriya? Bro, are you okay? He slowly pushed himself up into a sitting position. Uraraka was beside him in an instant to keep him supported. He rubbed idly at his head. His hair had come out of its ponytail. He was only mildly annoyed by it. Yep, he stretched his neck back and forth. Give me a second, that attack really threw me. Nice one. The yellow blonde sputtered. His jaw nearly hit the floor. Hold up, you're congratulating me? I thought I killed you. Midoriya snickered to himself. If only they knew how often he was torn apart. His mood took a dip. Nah, don't worry about it, I'm tougher than I look. He flexed his hands again, twisting his wrists around. Back to normal. Or rather, as normal as they could be. He slowly stood up, reeling as his brain tried to catch up with the movement. It's not a concussion or anything. You probably just shocked my circuits. Kaminari looked at him funny for a second. Oh, I didn't realize it was, like, technology? I don't know, I figured it was like Ida's engines. A mix of himself and his engine bits? Midoriya shrugged. So, what happened when I blacked out? Uraraka stood up next to him. Nothing really, you were only out for a few seconds. It was really freaky though. You were bugging out on the ground, I thought you were going to hurt yourself. He rubbed his neck awkwardly. Sorry, I had no idea my, quirk would react to electricity like that. Good to know. All Might suddenly appeared in the doorway with no amount of elegance. Young Midoriya. Are you feeling alright? Thought we lost you there. Midoriya waved him off. I'm okay, Just a bit frazzled, I guess. All Might gave him a once-over, checking for any visible injuries. Alright, if you're sure, my boy. Well, congratulations are in order for young Uraraka and yourself. You've won the round. Please follow me back to the viewing area. An awkward shuffle filled with worrying gazes later, they were surrounded by the rest of the class and Midnight, who was not so secretly looking at Bakugo. Bakugo had a strange air about him. He was standing alone, and the rest of the class weren't quick to correct that, bar Kirishima. The boy looked concerned. Shinso had stood next to Midoriya at some point, but didn't feel the need to say anything. He bumped the taller boy in the shoulder. Shinso bumped back. All Might cleared his voice loudly in front of the monitors. Okay, after that turbulent round, let's get to the discussions. Young Midoriya and Uraraka won the round, but who was the MVP? Anyone? A girl with dark hair in a high ponytail, Yaoyorozu he thinks, raised her hand. All Might nodded to her. Thank you, sensei. I think the MVP was Uraraka. She planned to cover more ground and avoid possible conflict by entering through another window, and knew not to engage in conflict she couldn't win on her own, as her and Kaminari both have mid to close range abilities. She also utilized her quirk to reach the bomb with maximum speed. Hence, she is the MVP. Said girl was glowing pink under the praise. Midoriya patted her on the back with a smile. She grinned back at him. All Might called for the next round, and Todoroki, Shuji, Hagakure and Ajuru, he thinks, left for their turn. He shuffled over to the far wall, where there were a few benches laid out. He watched as Midnight slowly crept next to him, not sitting down, but standing right above an open seat. He patted her arm, smiling. She sat down. Are you feeling okay? He glanced around to see if anyone was looking their way, before resting his head against her shoulder. She ran a hand through his hair. Did you lose a hair tie? Yeah, I didn't think to look for it. She pulled one from her wrist, gently braiding his hair. It's getting very long. It suits you. He chuckled. Thanks. Aizawa is going to be on the warpath when he hears what happened today. She let out a breathy laugh, nodding. I doubt he'll let that Bakugo boy off easy. All Might was the only one with a calm. Did he say something to you? It looked like he was going to kill you. Midoriya sighed. I don't know what's going on with him. I think there's some personal stuff he's trying to figure out, but it's concerning. I think he has it out for me. Midnight looked pensive. I don't know. I don't think he was in the right headspace. He didn't look present. It was like he wasn't in control. He looked at her, openly curious. She continued after a breath. I probably shouldn't say more, but I might mention it to show Yuta. Enough about all that. How's class? We couldn't really talk before the exercise. Midoriya grinned. She liked seeing him happy. It was like spite at the bastards that hurt him. It's really cool. Weird, very different but cool. I feel like I'm in a comic or something. I've made some friends, and I'm curious about where things are going. That's good. Has anyone caught your eye? He rolled his eyes but chuckled. Thanks for taking an interest in my personal life, but no. I haven't really let myself think about anything other than the now. She quirked a half-smile in understanding. And the two glorious fools? How have they been treating you? He giggled. Aizawa and Hisashi? They've been great. The only small thing has been resolved for the most part. He looked back at her. She had one eyebrow raised. Aizawa and Hisashi? You're not on a first-name basis with both of them? Huh? He hadn't even thought about that. I guess that thing I mentioned is kind of a part of it. I got a bit frustrated with Aizawa because I thought he was, like, ignoring what happened to me. It's nothing bad, but he would change the subject a lot and get annoyed at me for things I wouldn't consider abnormal. We're past that now. We've both apologized for being insensitive. It was around then that I was spending a lot more time with Hisashi. He just asked me to call him by his name and I returned the favor. And has Aizawa said anything about the name since? He rubbed his neck. I don't know, actually. If he was thinking it, he never said it. Should I have offered? He isn't exactly the most forward with personal things like that. She snorted. Ain't that the truth? As for whether or not you should, it's more a question of if you want to. If you're not comfortable, don't bother. If you're not sure, take a little while to think about it. He nodded, taking a mental note. He smirked sardonically. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? Aizawa saved me from Aperture and yet I'm closer with his partner. You know, he'd probably say you were better off not getting attached to him just because he saved you. Maybe. That does sound like him. Midoriya was suddenly aware of eyes on him. He looked around for the source and made direct eye contact with Todoroki. Apparently his round was already over. He was still leaning up against Midnight. Todoroki's eyes narrowed. Midnight seemed to realize at the same time as him how strange it would look for them to be sitting together so casually. She stood up, whispering a goodbye, and strut her way back to All Might at the front. Todoroki watched her exit, before giving him a final look. But when the last of the rounds were over, the class gradually filed out of the viewing area. The trip to the changing rooms was filled with a mix of chatter and silence, depending on who was in the mood to speak. Midoriya was walking next to Shinso, discussing the Insomniac's round. I didn't even do anything. It was all Yaoyorozu. Midoriya patted him on the back. I mean, it was a good strategy. Have her set up elaborate traps and you use your quirk as a last defense method. I'm pretty sure no one's figured out how it works yet. Shinso shrugged. We knew that. The hero team didn't know that. The rest of the class didn't know that. To them I probably look like a slacker. Riding on her coattails. Midoriya lightly smacked his arm. Hey, enough of that. If it had been a different pairing, it would have gone differently. Like if it had been you and me, my portals wouldn't be much help aside from movement and maybe distraction against someone like Todoroki. You could probably have gotten him if it had been a different pairing. Shinso shook his head. You have too much faith in me. No, I know you've worked hard to be here, and that your power is super cool, whatever it is. You have to think that you're my friend. Midoriya smirked. I can't be your friend and form my own opinions? Shinso smiled into the high neck of his jacket, a simple, dark purple trench coat. It requires quite a lot of brain power. Do you have enough to spare? The green boy threw an arm over his head, looking away dramatically. Ouch, my poor soul. You've burned me, saboteur. Shinso snorted. Midoriya smiled and bumped shoulders with him again. Shinso bumped back. They separated to go to their lockers. Midoriya slipped into the bathroom to change out of his costume. He tugged his hoodie over his head, adjusting the white vest underneath. He paused. His hand slowly moved back over his chest. Something wasn't right. He put his hoodie down onto his bag and tugged the neckline of the vest out of his way. The small, white disc in the center of his chest. It looked off. What the fuck? He pulled the vest off over his head and started eyeing the disc again. He ran a finger over where the white met his skin. It was higher on one side. That can't. What the fuck did she do to me? He wished, not for the first time, that he had any feeling in his hands. The best Aperture could replicate was the sensation of pressure. No pain. No sensitivity. He stared at the disc for far too long. Maybe I should ask Wheatley? Shaking himself out of his funk, he buttoned up his shirt, fumbled with his tie and tugged on his blazer. Once he was semi-presentable, he made his way back to the much emptier changing room. Back in the classroom, he tried maintaining idle conversation with his friends, avoiding Todoroki's stare and also trying to focus on Bakugo. The blonde was outright ignoring Kirishima. That was just plain rude. Bakugo stood up out of the blue, pushing past the eager boy and out of the classroom. Midoriya said a quick goodbye to his friends, following the other out. He was caught off guard by how fast the other was moving. By the time he reached the front entrance, Bakugo was already 1 foot out the gate. He ran forward, not letting what happened go. Echui, hold on a second. The other boy paused in his stride, jerking slightly before evening out again. What the hell am I doing? Midoriya came to a pause around 10 feet from the volatile blonde. What do you want? Midoriya mentally noticed that what he said wasn't a question. So, are you seriously asking me why I'm bothering to confront you after you tried to kill me? Bakugo flinched, looking away. That was new. Silence. Were you really about to pretend that didn't happen? Midoriya's voice was much softer the second time. Bakugo glared at him from under his bangs. More silence. Okay, I know we may not have gotten off on the right foot, and yeah, I probably could have just acted like we didn't know each other when I was at Aldera, But this is getting ridiculous. Bakugu's nose twitched. A reaction is all Midoriya needed. I can understand that you were too proud for help with the sludge guy or whatever, and I'm sure you were caught off guard when I showed up at your school, but what I'm trying to figure out is why the fuck you thought burning me alive was the best way to incapacitate me. Bakugu grit his teeth, taking a single step away from him. No. Midoriya was not going to let him run away from that. Is this about that boy? I read an article about a classmate of yours. Look, I'm sorry if me sitting in his seat brought stuff up for you, but that doesn't justify trying to kill me. Don't you fucking talk to me about him. Midoriya was surprised he answered at all. Tell me why. It's none of your fucking business. Midoriya threw up his arms in frustration. I think it's my business if you suddenly try to kill me at the first opportunity. Bakugu growled. The fuck do you want me to say? That I'm sorry, that I keep fucking seeing him, that it's my fucking fault? I get enough of that shit from my therapist. Stay the fuck out of my way and I'll stay out of yours. Midoriya didn't react outwardly. What the fuck? What? The blonde let out a grunt before turning and stomping off. Midoriya couldn't help but notice that it looked like he was crying. Later, when he was back home and in the comfort of his room, he would ponder what Bakugu could have possibly meant. Midoriya guessed he hadn't meant to reveal that he was both in therapy and dealing with something in regards to the boy. He was still angry about almost being blown up, but he was more worried for the other. That kind of reaction was not normal, especially towards someone he didn't know. Midoriya sighed in frustration. There was still something he was missing. A day later, the weekend, saw him at Inko's front door again. He'd been meaning to visit, but her texts had been a comfort to him. The last shred of the life he once had. Hisashi shifted beside him as he reached to ring the bell. He had brought another cake, a chocolate one this time. He wasn't sure if she liked chocolate. The door opened. Hello, Izuku. And who's this? His smile seemed lively. He smiled back. This is Yamada Hisashi, Aizawa's partner. He has also been taking care of me. She greeted the yellow blonde warmly, bringing them inside. Would you like tea? I see you've brought me more sweets. Yes, please, anything is fine for me. And yeah, I brought chocolate cake. Oh, that sounds lovely. And you, Yamada? The man was busy looking at some picture frames scattered around the apartment. Oh, but I mean yes, please. She chuckled at him, disappearing into the kitchen. Hisashi turned to him. She seems nice. I like her. Midoriya smiled at him. She is. It's weird. I'm like her great uncle, but she's more of an aunt figure to me than anything else. Well, even that might be a bit forward. The man nodded, pointing at one of the pictures. You know, when Aizawa said you look like her kid, I didn't think he meant that literally. Midoriya shrunk a bit. Glancing at the image himself, he couldn't help but feel guilty. He knew in his head he wasn't responsible for anything that transpired in that boy's life, but he felt guilty, like he'd taken the other's place. In the dark of the night, when he was alone with nothing but his head, he even counted back the months. He got out close enough to when this boy, Inko Akitani's son, died. He'd pestered Aizawa for details, and yet he was still paying the price. He had tried not to look at the photos of him for too long. The longer he looked, the more he saw. The same face, only paler. The same eyes, only red. The same messy hair, only an inky black. Maybe it was just his genetics, making every family member look strikingly similar to each other. Take him and his sister. They were practically identical, despite the age difference. Even Inko looked like his sister. And mother. He still wasn't sure where they stood. Hisashi put a hand on his shoulder. Hey, whatever you're thinking, it's just your panicky brain. Let's enjoy some cake and conversation. If you still feel bad in a bit, we can talk about it on the way home. Yeah. Hisashi flashed a small smile, pulling him over to the couch for a chat. He was clearly trying to distract the teen, but Midoriya appreciated it nonetheless. Inko returned shortly after with a neat tray. After settling on the couch with them, she opened the cake box, letting out a little wow. Once they were all munching on the treat, she spoke up. So, how has UA been? I've heard some near magical stories on the news, but I'd like to hear a first-hand account, if you don't mind. Midoriya smiled at her. Sure, It's a lot more normal than I was expecting. As in, I still have all the basic classes, only the teachers are all heroes. I feel like I'm in a comic or something. I've made a few friends. They're all really nice. I had a class with All Might the other day. It was interesting to see him up close. Midoriya thought it best to not mention that he had in fact met All Might before. Inko put a hand on her cheek. Oh my, is he as amazing as people say? Midoriya pondered the question. I don't know, to be honest. I can see the appeal. He's always smiling, always standing tall. It makes you wonder how happy he actually is. But, yeah, I think he's cool. He was nice to me anyway. Inko smiled wistfully, sipping her tea. She turned to Hisashi. And what do you do, Yamada? Midoriya snickered into his mug. The blonde looked like he was just told the funniest joke. Oh, I'm so sorry for not mentioning it earlier. You probably can't tell from my casual outfit, but I am the one and only present Mike. He threw up a hand with flourish, flicking his long hair over one shoulder. Inko smiled at the display. She looked mildly embarrassed. I'm sorry for not recognizing you. I suppose the hair threw me off. Is it true you're also an English teacher? Hisashi puffed up his chest. Midoriya immediately pictured a budgie. Maybe a cockatoo. Teacher? I run the whole department. Oh my. That must be a lot of work. Hisashi smiled kindly. Yeah, but I love it. If you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life, right? She nodded. Right? They continued chatting about anything and everything. The doorbell rang in the middle of their conversation. Excuse me, let me get that? She set her mug down, brushing off her skirt as she walked to the door. Midoriya looked over at Hisashi, who was chomping down on his cake. The boy giggled. The sound of the door opening echoed through the apartment. Ah, Katsuki. How nice of you to drop by. Hisashi choked on his cake. Midoriya's eyes snapped over to Hisashi's. The man was quietly trying to clear his airways of the cake, all while frantically looking between the green-haired boy and the direction of the door. Please be a different Katsuki, please. How are you? How have you been? A gruff, low voice responded. I'm okay, thanks. How are you? Fuck. Midoriya looked to Hisashi once more, who'd finally stopped coughing. They started whispering to each other in as calm voices as they could, which in hindsight weren't that calm. Hisashi whisper-shouted, What do we do? If he sees his classmate and teacher at a random woman's house together, we'll have a really hard time coming up with a believable excuse. Midoriya tilted his head, confused. Hisashi's eyebrows raised. None of your classmates know you have a connection to me. How do we explain us hanging out on the weekends? Midoriya bit his lip. He doesn't like me, at all. I can't figure him out, but I know he would not react well to seeing me more than he needs to. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Inko's soft, melodic chuckles bounced around the living room. Midoriya spared a small smile at the sound. How have you been getting on? The green-haired boy found it weird, hearing Bakugo sound calm. He sounded a lot more defeated than calm, really, but it was so starkly different from the brash, hostile way he spoke in class. It threw him for a loop. I'm okay. I'm doing better. One of my relatives recently came into my life, and he's been visiting me. Oh, that's good to hear. Sorry I haven't been around recently. No, don't worry about it. I know you've been so busy between exams and your new school. Is it everything you dreamt it would be? There was a pause. Midoriya couldn't help but feel responsible for the blonde's hesitation. He glanced at Hisashi again, who looked guilty about listening in on the conversation. I think so. I haven't been there that long yet. It's different. And what's this? Oh, the old hag asked me to drop this off. One of her shitty dinners or something. Tell her I said thank you. I'd invite you in, but I'm afraid I have guests right now. Would you and your mother be free tomorrow afternoon? We could go for tea. I'll pass on the invite. Bye, Auntie. Goodbye, Katsuki. It wasn't until the door clicked closed that the two finally exhaled. They shared another look, pretending to be deep in conversation when Inko returned, a plate covered in tin foil in her arms. She smiled. Sorry about that. A friend of mine's son was dropping something off. Hisashi waved his hand dramatically. No worries. I was just asking Izuku about his homework. Inko looked in Midoriya's direction, but he avoided her gaze, instead fixing it on his mug, having a sip of his cool tea. He attends UA. Actually, would you happen to know him? Bakugo Katsuki? Midoriya sputtered into his mug, thankfully masking the sound. He smiled awkwardly. Oh, yeah? Yeah. We're in the same class. Inko nodded to herself, turning into the kitchen to put away the plate. He furrowed his brow, looking down. It was a weird coincidence that Bakugo knew Inko. Was it a coincidence? No. Hold on, fuck me. He stood, pacing over to one of the many frames adorning the walls and shelves. He picked up the one that looked the most recent. Red eyes, long black hair. Inko's son. The son he bore a striking resemblance to. Who Bakugo apparently knew. Oh shit. Hisashi looked over the back of the couch at him. Izuku? Are you okay? Midoriya didn't know. He didn't know this boy. But he knew Bakugo. He knew Inko's son must have known Bakugo. They probably went to school together, which would explain the news article he had read, and what Aizawa had told him. He looked like this boy who died. He was in school regularly with Bakugo. Had he triggered the blonde? Or was it bad trauma? He seemed diplomatic towards Inko, if not a bit awkward. Bordering on uncomfortable. In school, though? It was like he lost it completely. Like when he tried to disassemble my atoms. What was it he had said? Bakugo's voice echoed in his head. The fuck do you want me to say? That I'm sorry, that I keep fucking seeing him, that it's my fucking fault? I get enough of that shit from my therapist. Stay the fuck out of my way and I'll stay out of yours. Bakugo blamed himself for something. Something to do with Akatani Mikumo. The kid who died. That news report had said it was a suicide. What the fuck? A hand landed on his shoulder. He spun around, meeting big, green eyes. He noticed, idly, that he was still holding the photo. Inko smiled sweetly, gently taking the photo frame from his hands and looking over it herself. Her eyes looked wet when she moved around him to put it back. She gripped his forearms. Izuku, please don't upset yourself. I don't know what you might be thinking, but I don't want anyone to be more upset about what happened. She paused, looking him in the eye for an extended period. I could have been better. I know that. But I can't keep wondering about the what-ifs. I can't let it hurt me more. He wouldn't have wanted me to be upset as much as I know he knew it would hurt me. He wouldn't have wanted anyone else to be hurt either. I was lonely for months before you came into my life. And here you are. Midoriya felt his artificial eyes welling up with artificial tears. His vision never clouded anymore. They hadn't in months, no matter how hard he cried. I know you are not my son. I'm not pretending you are. I like having you in my life, Izuku. I've loved talking to you, and learning about you and your new life. I want to have a connection to my family. He rested his head on her shoulder, bending a bit awkwardly because of the height difference. She didn't hesitate to wrap her arms around him. He took a breath. I know it's none of my business, Izuku, but have you thought of seeing a counselor of some kind? I can't begin to fathom the things you've been through, but I think you shouldn't have to deal with it alone. Midoriya could feel Hisashi's eyes on his back. He had overheard some of Hisashi and Aizawa's conversations. He knew they wanted him to talk to someone about everything, especially after his little row with Aizawa over the issue of not being able to talk about aperture. It's not that he wasn't interested in getting professional help, but the idea terrified him. Would he have to explain exactly what happened? Would they know that he's older than Quirks? Presumably they would have to. He didn't want people to know. It isolated him in a way. He would be seen as separate. Given the opportunity, where would he even start? His issues mostly stem from aperture, but there were so many things. How could he possibly force another person to imagine what had been done to him? I'll think about it. She pulled away and gave him a small smile. They didn't stay much longer after that. With a goodbye hug and a promise to visit again soon, they left. The weekend passed by faster than Midoriya was prepared for. He spent his last few hours trying desperately to clear his discovery from the forefront of all his thoughts. He'd spent over an hour listening to Wheatley ramble about something. Rhett hadn't been in a particularly talkative mood. Chonk was a great comfort, but unfortunately she couldn't speak, so Midoriya was stuck listening to his own thoughts. Another thing plaguing his thoughts? His stupid hands were malfunctioning. Nothing overtly wrong, but a lot of delayed reactions. They were slow to shoot portals when he tried, sometimes. Delay was the difference between completing a test and having to start over. He resigned himself to having to live with the occasional fuck-up, hoping that May could work her magic. He even made it to school extra early that Monday, knowing she would already be there. Sorry, I have no idea what's causing the issue. She tapped her chin with a wrench. Okay, leave it with me. I'll do a quick scan with my newest baby. It can pick up code and internal data. And when I say internal, I mean it literally. Once I have the data, I can run some simple simulations. I'll text you if I figure out what's going wrong. He appreciated her help immensely. So, he thanked her and headed to class 1A. Nothing wrong with being a bit early. He opened the door quietly, sliding it closed behind him. He was the fourth student in, after Ida, Todoroki and Bakugo, in no particular order. He avoided even glancing in Bakugo's general direction. He walked over to Ida, hoping to distract himself with small talk. Morning, Ida. How was your weekend? Ida brightened, sitting up even straighter. It was splendid, thank you. And how about you? Midoriya smiled as Ida sliced his arms through the air. It was interesting. I visited some family. Ida smiled in a comforting way. If he noticed Midoriya's slight mood, he didn't say anything. He did, however, ask him how he was finding classes. They chatted back and forth for a bit. It was nice. Midoriya liked Ida. He was very no-nonsense. Uraraka and Shinso eventually arrived, followed by the rest of the class. They quickly chimed in on the surface-level conversations. Aizawa slammed the door open, scaring Kaminari enough to make him jerk off of Kirishima's table, where he'd been sitting. Midoriya, along with the rest of the class, were in their seats in an instant. Midoriya focused on Shinsu's quiet breathing behind him, rather than the blonde in front of him. Aizawa cleared his throat, scanning the class once. As you all know, we have the trip later today, but now? Everyone held their breath. You will be selecting a class president. Do it before the end of class, I don't care how you decide. Aizawa hit the floor, asleep, before the class could finish cheering. Kaminari leapt onto Kirishima's desk again. Yeah. A normal activity. People started calling out at random, declaring their capability to be the best choice for class president. Midoriya briefly thought about it, but he kind of had enough going on already. Ida shot up, standing dead straight with one arm being held up with him. Classmates, to make the choice as fair as possible, we should organize a vote. The frog girl, Azui, poked her chin with one finger. We haven't been classmates that long. How do we know people won't just vote for themselves? Yaoyorozu spoke up. I see your point, but wouldn't that only further prove that the winner is the best choice? They will have already garnered the trust of enough of the class to vote for them over themselves. With that, she created a small ballot box, and everyone got a slip of paper. Midoriya hesitated. He'd love to vote for Shinso, just to piss him off, but he scribbled Ida's name. He trusted his friend to do a good job. Once all the ballots had been collected, they were counted, and Ida and Yaoyorozu made fast work of writing the scores on the blackboard. Midoriya raised an eyebrow at the 2 votes he had. He slowly turned to Shinso, who was smirking at him. He narrowed his eyes good-naturedly. The insomniac stuck his tongue out at him. Ida had 4 votes overall, and Yaoyorozu had 3. Ida flushed when he realized he'd been picked. He smiled triumphantly, shaking hands with Yaoyorozu. Aizawa stood up at the bell, looking over the board once. All right, so Ida Tenya will be the class representative, and Yaoyorozu Momo will be the vice. The class filtered out of the room, making their way to the massive lunch hall. Midoriya tried to subtly punch Shinso in the side. The other grinned at him, his dark eye bags making the facial expression distinctly sarcastic-looking. Midoriya rolled his eyes, turning to Ida, who was walking with a prominent spring in his step. Uraraka shared a look with him, smiling. Hey Ida? You seem pretty happy about the vote. The tall boy nodded, sitting at their table. This will provide me with the opportunity to do more for the class. I avidly await the first challenge to overcome. Uraraka looked at him closely for a beat. Ida, are you rich? You talk really fancy? The boy balked. Midoriya stifled his snickers into his lunch. I suppose. I come from a well-known hero family. Ingenium. Midoriya smiled at his friend. It was clear that Ida admired his brother. The green-haired boy had done a little research when they'd met at the entrance exam. He's a great hero. Ida's smile widened. He is. I hope I can live up to him. Shinsu's smile was a tilted thing, but no less sincere than Midoriya's or Uraraka's. I'm sure you will, buddy. Warning. Midoriya flinched. An alarm. Just an alarm. Something he wasn't paying attention. A voice. It sounded nothing like GLaDOS. Calm down, calm down. They got stuck in the mob of students climbing over each other to get out. Midoriya was slammed up against the massive windows, disorienting him. He didn't dare move, leaning as far into the window as he could. He looked out, a commotion catching his eye. News reporters? Hizashi and Aizawa were down there already. Why had the gate not shut on the journalists? He squinted, trying to get a view of the crowd. Movement caught his eye, away from the horde of cameras and microphones. Someone was walking away from the onslaught of people. A black pullover with the hood raised. That was strange. He took a breath, turning and looking out over the mob in the hall. He caught sight of Ida and Uraraka up against the opposite wall, a few meters ahead of him. Ida, Uraraka. He mentally pleaded that they would hear him. Uraraka's eyes snapped onto him. It's the press, not a break-in. Her eyes widened, and she nodded sharply. He saw her patting Ida on the shoulder. She said something to him, and he looked around rapidly. He looked Midoriya in the eye, pointing at the large sign a little ways in front of them. Midoriya caught on to what he needed. He aimed his hand, pleading once more that the portals would react in time. It snapped open, a direct route for Ida. Uraraka slapped his shoulder, and the boy started floating through the portal. Midoriya let it close behind him. Attention, fellow students, there is nothing to worry about. The break-in is merely the media. The crowd slowly stalled, students finally not pushing and shoving past each other. Once the hall had cleared, Uraraka pressed her hands together, letting Ida land in front of them. Shinso approached them, looking a bit rattled. Uraraka smiled. Wow, Ida. You came up with that so quickly. The boy flushed under the praise. Thank you, but I couldn't have done it had the both of you not helped me. Shinso piped up from next to Midoriya. I think you've already earned your new title, class prez. Ida seemed ready to burst. Midoriya chuckled and led them back to their lunch table. That had been horrifying. A feminine voice coming from seemingly nowhere with alarms blasting in the background. It was all a little too familiar for him. He sighed, tuning back into the conversation his friends were having. What a day! So far. When they were all changed and ready to go, the girls who had requested replacements donning their school tracksuits, they waited together outside for their bus. Ida tried, in vain, to organize a seating arrangement to make the ease of entry as stress-free as possible. Unfortunately for him, the bus had a different layout. Poor Ida. Midoriya pat his back as he mounted the bus. He sat, comfortably tucked in next to Kirishima and Azui. The frog girl turned to him. Midoriya. I say what's on my mind. He raised an eyebrow, smiling. Okay, good to know, Azui. Call Mitsuyu? He blinked before nodding. I can't figure out how your quirk works. It confuses me. His mind stalled. Oh, I don't really know what to say to that. Kirishima smiled. It's super cool. Really powerful and flashy. Mine is cool, yeah, but it's not very good at grabbing the attention. For demonstration, he held out his hand, hardening it up to his forehead. Midoriya watched, transfixed. Wicked. Huh. That is so cool. I don't know who you've been talking to, but wow. How does it work? Kirishima's face brightened. Oh, I can harden pretty much all of my body. It's pretty tough, manly. You know. Midoriya nodded, smiling. Kirishima continued. But if you really want to talk flashy, you've got to think of Yaoyorozu, Todoroki, and Bakugo. A few people looked his way after mentioning Bakugo. He pretended he didn't notice. No one was brave enough to ask either of them what transpired during the hero versus villain training. He was happy about it. Tsuyu stared forward. Bakugo is too aggressive. I find it hard to believe he'll be popular. The blonde gripped the rails of the seat. The FUCK? You looking for a fight? She looked at Midoriya, pointing a thumb in his direction. See? Midoriya briefly, accidentally met eyes with the blonde. He felt his face morph into some kind of a grimace. Bakugo looked away, huffing. The girl with earphones for ears, Gyre, leaned the other way, sending a look in his direction. Kaminari made a crack at Bakugo, and while he was busy glaring at the yellow blonde, Midoriya dared to look at him again. Really look. He looked tired. He had prominent eye bags, he looked a little pale. He wondered if he and his mother had gone for tea with Inko. The conversation all but cut out as they pulled up to the massive facility. It looked kind of like a stadium, with the rounded roof and large entrance door. Aizawa stood up, stretched out his back, and waved the students to follow him. Midoriya noticed that he was patrolling late at night a lot recently. It was affecting his ability to stay awake during the day. He made a mental note to mention it to Hisashi. Once the class was gathered outside the impressive building, a person in what looked like an astronaut suit emerged from the massive door. Uraraka made a sound of surprise beside him. Whoa, that's 13, the space hero. I love them so much. I should see if they'd be willing to sign my arm. Midoriya chuckled. As they were ushered inside, he felt wrong. He tried to pay attention while 13 and Aizawa explained the rules or whatever it was they were saying. In the back of his mind, he realized that All Might wasn't with them. He started looking around. Something wasn't right. He could feel it. A normal person would write it off as paranoia, but he had gotten used to constantly looking over his shoulder. His intuition hadn't been wrong in years. Look. He felt compelled to listen. He took a step forward, looking down the massive stairs. There was a fountain. The water gushing out from the top stalled for a split second. Something was wrong. Time seemed to be moving in slow motion. He turned to Aizawa, who already had his eyes on him. The man's eyes widened almost unnoticeably. He turned to face the fountain as well. The water stalled once more, before it cut out altogether. Midoriya? Uraraka had 4 fingers on his shoulder, but he couldn't drag his eyes away from the fountain. Aizawa got 13's attention, pointing to the fountain. He already had his phone in his hand, held up to his ear. Midoriya looked back. But purple. Yellow eyes. A swirling mass of mist formed in front of the fountain. Aizawa's eyes snapped to him momentarily, before looking back at his phone. Midoriya assumed he couldn't reach whoever he just tried to call. A hand stuck out from the cloud, followed by another hand, dismembered this time. The swirling mist exploded into a massive gateway, 100 people making their way through. He heard Kirishima behind him. What? Is this part of the training? Aizawa looked panicked. This is not part of it, those are villains. He felt more than saw his classmates react. The mood plummeted. Some cried out in fear. Todoroki walked up next to him, also looking at the forming army. Aizawa commanded Kaminari to try and reach the school, while pulling his goggles from his capture weapon. Time sped up again. He had a hand on Aizawa before he could blink. You can't, your quirk. Your speciality is in sneak attacks, not taking on 100 at once. Aizawa adjusted his goggles, not looking at him. Heroes can't be a one-trick pony. Don't worry about me. Get your class out and get help? Midoriya didn't have time to say anything before the hero leapt into the crowd of killers. He saw his classmates running to the door, but he was stuck in place. Someone, he assumed it was Todoroki, pulled him by the hood of his jumper. I'm afraid I can't let you leave just yet. A deep, smooth voice came from nowhere. The same purple mist formed in front of them. I have been instructed to keep you here. Like hell you will. Bakugo and Kirishima leapt forward, both lashing out at the swirling cloud. They passed through it, harmlessly. A nice attempt, albeit in vain. I'm afraid I must spread and scatter you now, farewell. Midoriya's gut twisted. The mist snapped outward, attempting to engulf all of them. He latched onto the first thing he could reach, and he was falling. Falling. He heard himself screaming. Everything was black, but he kept his grip strong. Suddenly he could see. Everything got brighter. He was falling from a height, presumably the height of the ceiling. He was clinging to Todoroki's sleeve. The other didn't seem bothered, but then again, he was probably preoccupied. "Hey! Todoroki, grab onto me." The split boy looked at him, clearly confused. "Just trust me. I can get us down safely." Todoroki looked around, almost begging something else to help him instead. He closed his eyes, latching a hand onto Midoriya. He grabbed onto the half-and-half boy, holding him bridal style. Midoriya pretended not to notice the disdainful look the other threw him. The ground rushed to meet them. Midoriya landed flat on his legs. Todoroki flinched, as if expecting to slam into the floor of the landslide zone. His boots canceled out the force. Todoroki slowly opened his eyes, looking at the ground, and then Midoriya. He pushed himself out of the other's hold, standing upright. They looked around back to back. People in ridiculous outfits started to surround them. Midoriya looked over his shoulder at the split boy, who was glaring menacingly at the new arrivals. "Midoriya. Yeah. Don't move." Todoroki slammed his foot into the ground. Massive planes of ice burst out in every direction. He stood as still as possible, watching the ice swerve around the two of them. Within seconds, everyone in sight was encased in glistening ice. Midoriya felt a tug in his gut. He spun around, slamming his foot into the nether regions of the guy who just tried to beat Todoroki over the head. He howled in pain, dropping his staff and keeling over. Todoroki raised an eyebrow at him. "What?" "Thank you." Midoriya smiled, glancing over the icy wasteland. "Not a bother. Let's see what these pricks have to say for themselves. Tell us what you know, or I can guarantee you'll regret it. Why did you break into you?" Midoriya raised an eyebrow at Todoroki's tone. The dual-colored teen had his right hand poised in front of one of their attackers, icy vapor promising pain. The frozen man glared with all the intimidation of a puppy in a raincoat. "Like hell I'd tell you too, I'd rather freeze." Todoroki's eyes darkened. "You will. You'll start to lose feeling in your feet within the next 3 minutes. After that, your skin will be beyond recovery as your organs start to shut down. Your blood will crystallize in your veins, but by then you won't feel cold. You'll be burning." Midoriya inwardly cringed at the notion. Fucking hell. The icicle man shrunk. It was pitiful and hilarious. Fine. We're here to kill All Might." Todoroki's face didn't change, but Midoriya noticed the slight shift in temperature. He was caught off guard. He stepped around the taller boy, glaring down at the intruder. He let his eyes glow just enough to be unsettling. "And how, pray tell, do you plan to do that, especially considering the fact that he isn't, here?" "I don't know." Todoroki let the temperature of the air drop further. "A warning." No, I swear. I have no idea. Your word means nothing to us." "Explain." "The weird guy with the hand, he said he was going to take down All Might, and that he needed backup. He never said what he was actually going to do. All I know is the bastard kept going on about a cheat code, or some creepy shit like that. He called it a Nomo, that's all I can say for certain." Midoriya put a hand on Todoroki's shoulder. "He's telling the truth, we should keep moving." Brushing his hand off, Todoroki turned away in the other direction. The green-haired boy turned back to the meek criminal. His jaw was starting to chatter. "If you know what's good for you, you won't try to get out of that ice." He went to catch up, following the direction the other boy went without waiting for a response. Todoroki stopped as they neared the plaza, dead center in the U.S. "What? Why'd we stop?" He was grabbed by the wrist, shoved down behind a series of boulders. Todoroki held a finger to his lips, before pointing into the plaza. Midoriya followed his finger. There was a thing. A big hulking being. Brain exposed, rippling muscles. Standing at least 7 feet tall. Its dead-eyed stare bore into them. Looking but not seeing. "Is that normal? Oh my fucking. That can't be a person. I've seen some weird quirks, but that isn't natural." Todoroki nodded in silent agreement. "It's not seeing us." He nodded again, more frantically. "What do we do?" Midoriya shrugged, looking around. Aizawa was fighting off the whole mob at once. It would be really impressive if their lives weren't in danger. He looked in the directions of the other zones, only seeing the occasional movement of bodies. He hoped they were his class and not whoever thought it was a good idea to attack a bunch of 15-year-olds. His eyes snapped over to the ringleaders off to the side, next to the Nomu. The dark purple and black mist guy was standing, hovering, beside a light-haired man with a literal severed hand on his face. Shigaraki Tamura, 13, is incapacitated. One escaped. We should leave before the pros arrive. All Might isn't here and the mission is compromised. The handman growled. If you weren't my escape route, I would kill you right now. You're as useless as the rest of these pawns, Kurogyri. Midoriya had to be impressed by the sheer ridiculousness of his new life. Laughing would be completely inappropriate, but he was mildly hysterical at that point. It's like something straight out of a movie. Todoroki looked at him in confusion. He pointed to the hand guy. I assume that's a human hand. The dual boy paled, lowering his eyebrows. Speak of the devil. The light-haired man lunged forward at speeds Midoriya did not at all expect. Directly towards Aizawa. He instinctively shifted forward, but Todoroki seized his upper arm in a bruising grip. He glared at the taller boy. Let go of me. Todoroki's grip remained tight around his bicep. He had to watch as the guy, Shigaraki, gripped Aizawa's elbow. The hero froze. What? Midoriya felt Todoroki tense beside him as they watched their teacher's skin gray and crack, revealing the bloodied muscle beneath. His hand flew up to his mouth as he suppressed the urge to vomit. He tugged his arm from the other's grip, but didn't move forward. We have to do something. Eraserhead's quirk isn't suited to big groups and he just got blitzed by a fucking touch. Come on, let's move before that thing decides it wants to join in. Todoroki hesitated. Midoriya had never seen him hesitate. He's a pro hero, he can take care of himself. We should avoid running into this blind. That was the only way Midoriya knew. The only way he could. The tests were unpredictable. One couldn't wait around and ponder, you had to act. He had been hurt more times than he could count, but he still finished the tests. He got through them by sheer spite alone. He didn't need to plan, he needed. I'm not the final boss, Eraserhead. Then, the dark, hulking thing moved. Vanished before he could blink. Aizawa's head made a sickening, wet crunching sound as it collided with the ground. Midoriya froze. He watched Shigaraki lean closer to his teacher, his guardian. His friend. Todoroki had to grab him by the middle to stop him from running in. He was thrashing wildly to escape his grasp. Stop it, they'll kill you. Get down. Shigaraki said something. Midoriya couldn't hear him over the blood coursing through his ears, but Todoroki went cold next to him, his movements stalling for a split second. That's all Midoriya needed. He scrambled forward, throwing himself into a roll as he landed, sprinting as fast as his artificial feet would carry him. Shigaraki was approaching him as well, hand outstretched. Things began moving slowly. Midoriya ducked and rolled out of the man's path, springing up and kneeing him in the stomach as he turned. Shigaraki heaved, but he was already moving to Aizawa. The thing slammed the pro's head into the ground again, almost mocking him. He didn't know what to do. Shigaraki said something again, more angry this time. Noma, kill this NPC. The Nomu's head snapped to him, its toothy beak looking like a smile. He kept running. It let Aizawa go, his body falling in a heap, and stood to its full height, staring him down. Midoriya knew it was fast. He didn't know how fast, but he knew it was faster than him. Running wouldn't work, he had to act. Aizawa wasn't moving. He leapt back, its fist passing within a hair's breadth of him. He caught his balance as it pulled its massive hand from the concrete. That would have killed me. Was he breathing? The thought could have made him collapse, but he glared. What if he was? Maybe he should have made a plan. It tugged at its hand again. The ground around it cracked. He looked to Shigaraki on his left. He was standing by the fountain, a hand on his stomach. Midoriya had a bad plan. One that would probably get him killed. Probably. He started toward Shigaraki at speeds he didn't know he possessed. Kurogyri's eyes narrowed at him, and his mist shifted, awaiting his next move. Thankfully, Midoriya didn't have to think around the only other teleporter. Bakugo and Kirishima appeared from the earthquake zone. The blonde blasted Kurogiri, holding him down with one hand. A fist closed around his arm, stopping him in his tracks. He went cold. He was tugged, facing back at the Nomu. It raised its other arm to strike him. He braced for impact when the temperature dropped. He opened one eye to see the Nomu's arm, poised to strike, coated in ice. He didn't have time to thank the bicolored boy. Instead, he grinned like a maniac, an indescribable look in his eyes. He twisted out of its grip and advanced toward Shigaraki. He was only a few feet away. He was so close. He heard a crack. A squelch. Turned. A massive, hulking and frozen arm fell to the ground. He watched in horror as its flesh wound around itself, as veins threaded together and muscle wrapped and wrapped and wrapped. Skin, good as new, formed over the arm. A whole new arm. In less than 10 seconds. What the fuck? Shigaraki laughed, hoarse, behind him. Like my toy? Regeneration is such a useful skill. So, do you want to try and trump my cheat code? The Nomu was staring at him again. The lack of emotion was chilling Midoriya to his core. Finish him. He jumped back, narrowly avoiding another punch, but this time, it didn't pause to let him catch him balance. It pushed forward and forced him back and back. He leapt up, letting a punch meet the sole of his long fall boot. The instant cancellation of the impact gave him a second to find his footing. If it was possible, the Nomu looked confused as to how he was still standing. From the sound that Shigaraki made, it wasn't the only one. What? This NPC is cheating. Nomu, kill him. Midoriya watched him over his shoulder as he cried out. He was close enough. He jumped up, landing on the next fist to fly his way. He sprung off of it and landed neatly behind Shigaraki. Without a thought, he kicked him forward. The Nomu's next attack stalled as its commander fell onto it. Shigaraki let out an animalistic scream. First, All Might doesn't show, then my precious toy can't kill you, and that stupid hero wannabe over there has my escape route. You know what? Maybe if I pick off one or two of his oh-so-special kids, your symbol of peace will finally show. Shigaraki reached for him, both hands outstretched. He made to move back. The fucking fountain. From then on, Midoriya Izuku decided that he fucking despised fountains. Never saw a single fountain in Aperture, and he was almost thankful for it. Nope, he hates pointless, goddamn fountains. He fell back, bending at the knee. He couldn't grip anything to right himself. He was fucking vulnerable and this guy would kill him and that would be it. A bang. Midoriya landed ass first in the fountain. Everyone stopped. Shigaraki, without moving his hands, looked over his shoulder. The figure of All Might appeared from the smoke, gripping the blazer of his ridiculous yellow suit. He wasn't smiling. Shigaraki grinned from under the hand. Midoriya wanted to knock his teeth out. Do not fear, students. He stepped forward, the sound echoing around the whole facility. For I am here. Nomu, back to the original plan. Get me Kurogiri. It vanished from sight again, this time appearing in front of Bakugo, who was still holding down Kurogiri. His eyes widened. He flinched backwards, aiming a gauntlet hand. And he was gone in a flash of yellow. Midoriya had the wind knocked out of him, and then he was sitting beside Aizawa, Kirishima and Bakugo a good 20 meters from where he had just been. Todoroki was sprinting over from his hiding spot, skidding to a halt next them. Bakugo assumed a fighting stance, followed shortly by Kirishima. Midoriya knelt with Aizawa, cradling him as gently as he could. He looked back at All Might. Shigaraki had a look of pure, unadulterated glee on his face as he stood across from the number one hero. He's either really confident in his creature, or he has a death wish. Kurogiri was floating menacingly, his yellow, glowing eyes narrowed as he glared. The Nomu stood, an empty husk, staring dead-eyed at the far wall, as if it hadn't moved since it got here. As if it hadn't tried to kill him already. As if it hadn't ripped off its own arm and watched as it grew back from nothing. Come on, All Might. Shigaraki looked like a lunatic, laughing to himself and presumably patting his own back for this operation. Nomu, kill him. And they were off, both clashing in a resounding boom as their fists met. It didn't flinch. Kirishima did that thing just deflect All Might's entire attack? Midoriya held his unconscious carer closer to his chest. All Might seemed a little shocked himself. He let out a hearty laugh, despite the circumstances, and continued throwing and dodging punches at alarming speeds. Their momentum was blasting gusts of wind in all directions, and Midoriya found himself huddling closer to the ground to avoid being blown away. All Might caught the Nomu around the waist midair and slammed it into the ground. Midoriya saw Kurogyri blink out of sight for a split second. A portal ripped itself open under the brawling superpowers, and in the span of 1 second, All Might lost the upper hand. The Nomu's arm emerged from another portal, gripping the hero's side. Blood. Midoriya had seldom seen heroes bleed, but seeing All Might, the symbol of peace, #1 hero extraordinaire, bleed snapped him back into the moment like a rubber band. He was aware of his mentor, bleeding and definitely concussed, if only that, in his arms. He was aware of the temperature as it dropped, ice tearing up the ground as it wrapped around the Nomu. He was aware of Bakugo and Kirishima shouting, begging All Might to win. He was aware of Todoroki kneeling next to him, applying a thin layer of ice to Aizawa's injured head, far more gently than Midoriya had expected. He was aware of All Might, who just got to witness the Nomu's horrific ability to regrow limbs. Strength and regrowth? What kind of quirk do you even have? All Might was angry, and Midoriya realized that the blonde didn't know that the Nomu wasn't human. Or if it was, it hadn't been in a long time. Don't bother talking to my cheat code, it can't respond anymore. Midoriya was aware that he really wanted to knock Shigaraki's teeth out. Super strength, super speed, shock absorption and super healing. My Nomu was created just for you, just to beat you. Shock absorption, huh? Not shock nullification. That means all I have to do is overwhelm that quirk. They were throwing punches faster than the eye could see, or ever hope to follow. They were hit, very suddenly, with an insane amount of wind. It was almost too much to bear, but with an injured, but breathing, Aizawa in his arms and Todoroki creating a blockade of ice, he soldiered on. The ground around the two brawling bruisers split with the shock of their strength. They were meeting strength with strength, fire with fire. Midoriya was starting to worry that they'd reached a stalemate. An impasse. A juxtaposition, if you will. But then, All Might was moving a fraction faster than his adversary. His punches landing rather than being blocked. The Nomu wasn't able to keep up. The #1 rained down a storm of attacks relentlessly, never once stopping. Even when it was clear he was being tired out. Even when Midoriya could have sworn he saw the man spitting blood. You put up a worthy fight, but All Might planted his feet. You forgot one thing, heroes will always surpass their own limits. He pulled his fist back, readying for one final, almighty punch. Yue's motto, I'm sure you've heard it. Go beyond. He landed a bone-snapping uppercut right to the Nomu's jaw. Plus ultra. It soared upwards, bent in half at the waist. It flew and flew, up and up until it smashed through the uppermost ceiling of the facility. Only it didn't stop there. It split the clouds around it, until it was completely out of sight. The blasts of wind died down, and Midoriya looked at All Might again. He appeared from a cloud of smoke once more. He stood, his shirt bloodied and torn, his lips stained rouge with his own blood. He held a fist to his chest, triumphant, before turning back to Shigaraki and Kurogyri. So, who's next? Shigaraki looked like he was fit to have an aneurysm. Kurogyri wasn't responding. No. The handyman was working himself into a bigger panic. First, you don't show. Next, my unbeatable pawn isn't able to kill a single student, and then you fucking ruin my fun by blasting it to Kingdom Come. Midoriya's eyes were on All Might's back. He was still smoking. The steam was rolling off him in coils. Why was he still smoking? But I'll make this whole stupid thing worth it. Midoriya knew what was about to happen. I'll do what I came here to fucking do. Midoriya, carefully, dumped Aizawa in Todoroki's arms, and was on his feet in a second, sprinting towards All Might and Shigaraki. I'm going to kill you. Shigaraki practically dived for All Might as Midoriya ignored the screams of his classmates behind him. All Might hadn't moved yet. Midoriya knew he wasn't one for drawing out fights if he could avoid it. He must be getting weaker. He ran, and in an instant he was beside All Might, and Shigaraki was reaching for him and he realized he had no plan. He aimed a kick for the other's arm, hoping to deflect the attack, but purple, swirling gas proved that as pointless. His leg breezed through, coming out off somewhere to the left. Shigaraki was practically on top of them and Midoriya was unbalanced and All Might wasn't moving yet and fuck. A gunshot. Shigaraki screamed and clutched his hand to his chest. 2 more bullets followed, lodging in his shoulder and thigh, before Kurogiri teleported them both out. Midoriya landed on his ass, panting with fire in his lungs. He looked to the entrance of the USJ. A hero with a literal gun, snipe he thinks, was still aimed to fire. Ida was standing proud, chest puffed up as pro-heroes bustled in after him. Midoriya watched Shinso and Kaminari be brought in from the flood zone. He watched Uraraka smiling with relief, and Todoroki handing Aizawa over to Hisashi. He saw All Might cough blood. The smoke was rolling off him tenfold. "Whoa, are you okay? I'm like 60% sure they brought Recovery Girl, so I can go find her or something?" The blonde hunched over, coughing and coughing. It was wet and pained and it made Midoriya cringe. He was reminded, briefly, of his own health taking a turn in Aperture. Almost everything in Aperture could give you upwards of 8 deadly diseases, be it from the radioactivity of the tech to the lead in the air and walls. He'd been sick, and GLaDOS hadn't understood. She kept testing him, kept him awake for far longer than what was needed, because she didn't understand. She'd finally let up when he collapsed one day, out of the blue. He had felt like he was dying. Aches, pains, unbearable tightness in his chest. He still thinks he had a heart attack or something. GLaDOS never said anything about it afterwards. Considering how often she used his failures as insults, it was unsettling. He had woken up in the pod he was kept in, before he was upgraded to a bed. His chest constricted at the memory. He tuned back into the moment. "I'm fine, my boy. You should check in with your friends." Midoriya blanched. "No, I can't leave you like this. You can barely stand by yourself. Young Midoriya, please." He broke into another coughing fit, still smoking. "Please, I will be fine, just get going." He didn't want to leave him like that. But he took a step backwards and another. "Okay, but I'm sending Recovery Girl your way." He got a thumbs up, and he was sprinting back towards the entrance. "Midoriya. Bro, are you okay? That was crazy." Kirishima was just, presumably, running to where he had been. When they caught up with each other, Midoriya gripped the redhead's arms for balance. Whoa, take a second. That was really intense. Are you doing okay?" I think so. I need to see Aizawa. Is he okay?" Kirishima pulled one of his arms around his own shoulders, letting Midoriya lean on him for balance as they walked back to the entrance. "Last I saw, Present Mike took him to an ambulance out front. I think they've left already." Todoroki seemed shaken, in his own weird way. "You might want to check up on him, dude bro." Midoriya nodded, all the energy draining from him at once. He slumped further against Kirishima as they walked. "Midoriya, are you okay?" Shinso ran to meet them, Kaminari in tow. "I'm okay, just exhausted. What about you? I saw you were on the boat." Midoriya didn't comment, but with the blood running from Shinso's nose and Kaminari standing guiltily beside him, he pieced together that Shinso may have been using his quirk for way longer than he should have on more people than he was used to. "I'm fine, just need a quick power coma and I'll be good as new." Midoriya, despite his maddening drowsiness and headache, snorted. The 4 exited the unforeseen simulation joint and he took a deep breath of fresh air, taking in the blue sky and bright sun, as if they all weren't just in danger of losing their lives. Midoriya was seen to by a faceless paramedic, but given his lack of injuries the most they could do was give him a drink rich in electrolytes and a shock blanket. He was sitting with Uraraka, Ida and Tsuyu in silence, none of them knowing what to say. He caught a glimpse of Todoroki, talking to some detective or another. They made eye contact. "I'll be back in a minute." He followed Todoroki, who led him away from the commotion outside the facility. They stared at each other. And stared. Midoriya wasn't going to start the conversation first, and given the look Todoroki was giving him, it wasn't a pleasant conversation coming. Finally, Todoroki broke the silence. "That was incredibly stupid of you." Midoriya rolled his eyes. "You could have died." "So?" Todoroki faltered. "What?" I said, "So?" "I knew the risk when I ran in there. I stopped that thing from killing our teacher. You helped me. You helped All Might. Why bother waste time with what if?" His voice was as flat as he felt. He felt like he'd been scraped raw. His throat was burning. He was tired. He wanted to go home. Todoroki stared at him for another second. "You did save him. And you helped All Might. I'm not denying that. You should have cared more about your own safety. Your disregard of self-preservation is alarming." Midoriya wrapped the blanket closer around himself. "Is that all you wanted to talk about? I was worried about you, but if you're only going to give me grief dash..." Todoroki reached out like he was going to grab him, but the movement was aborted and he gave up halfway through, letting his hand drop to his side. "You were worried for me?" Midoriya stared at him. "You looked scared and I wanted to help. I'm sorry if my actions caught you off guard." Todoroki nodded once. "I'm not sure what to make of you, Midoriya. You don't fit my initial impression of you in the slightest." Midoriya snorted. "Thanks. Come on, let's go sit with the others." Todoroki looked like he wanted to disagree, but one sharp eye from Midoriya later, he was walking shoulder to shoulder with him. And so they sat, along with the rest of their classmates, in a circle on the road. Who could have possibly guessed the day would go the way it had? Midoriya? He tilted his head to Todoroki, whose voice broke the timid silence that fell over the group sitting on the cold, unforgiving pavement. "I couldn't help but notice that you didn't use any of your portals during the fight. Why didn't you teleport out of the confrontation with the Nomu?" Shinso settled beside him, watching Todoroki closely. "Well, it's kind of hard to explain." That got the group's attention. Midoriya knew he wasn't ready to spill the whole truth, but maybe he could start with a bit of it. Ida finished his carton of orange juice and sat up straight. "Midoriya, please know that you aren't required to tell us anything that makes you uncomfortable." Uraraka threw him a tired smile. "Yeah. We're here for you whenever you're ready." The boy smiled to himself, sighing. "My portal guns, or just my hands I guess, haven't been working properly for a few days. Since the heroes and villains training, actually." Eyebrows were thrown up. Surprise evident on most faces. Todoroki remained deadpan. "Kaminari shocked me and I passed out. I think he did something to my circuits. It's nothing fatal or life-changing, I can still use them, but on occasion they will malfunction. It's unpredictable and it's irritating, but I have spoken to a support student. She's been looking into it for me." Shinso laid a hand on his shoulder. Midoriya hadn't taken him for the physically affectionate type. "So you put a finger on her chin." "Yeah, Karo, it makes sense that you wouldn't risk it. You didn't tell anyone else?" Todoroki looked away. "You should have told me that in the landslide zone. I didn't know you were fighting with reduced power. That makes your actions even more dangerous." Midoriya pursed his lips. "It's not like it would have made a difference. I can't use portals on surfaces unless they contain some amount of basalt. It's an annoying design choice, but what exactly can I do about it?" Ida leaned back minutely. "Basalt. Of course, the central plaza was entirely soil and earth. The only form of basalt I can think of is concrete." "The fountain?" Midoriya raised an eyebrow. "It has to be a certain size, one I have no control over." The taller boy nodded to himself, scratching his chin. His helmet was sitting off to one side. Uraraka cleared her throat. "Annoying design choice? That's a funny way to put it. My quirk makes me really sick if I use it too much, but I'd call that more of a limitation or a drawback than design choice." "You sure are interesting, huh?" Midoriya wasn't expecting that. He didn't think his phrasing was weird. Was it? "I'm going to have to be more careful, unless I want to deal with every possible question under the sun." He laughed it off. Shinso nudged him. "I don't understand why you didn't tell your buddy over there that your quirk isn't working. You could have been overpowered easily without your portals and stuff." The green-haired boy pondered the sentiment briefly. Had it mattered in the end? Not really, but it could have ended a lot worse. I know I told Todoroki not to focus on the what-ifs, but I need to plan ahead. This isn't the same as the facility. This isn't a simulation designed to further science. This isn't a test. I need to think now. I didn't think. It's not like me, but the consequences didn't compute in my head. It could have gotten me killed. I'll be more careful. Shinso smacked his back. None of that, we're safe. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. Midoriya threw him a half smile. Recovery girl? Is there any chance I could see him now? The old hero pitied him. The look on her face. The slight downturn of the corners of her mouth. It made him feel like a child, and he didn't appreciate it. I'm sorry, Sonny, but he hasn't woken up yet. You know he needs all the energy he can get if I'm to use my quirk. Yamada should be here soon, you can wait with him. He sighed and fell back into his chair. He pulled out his phone, ignoring all messages except for Inko's. After sending a quick response, he resolved to visit her as soon as he could. Izuku. Sorry, little listener, the detective had me answering more questions than I knew what to do with. Any news on Shoyuta? Present Mike landed on the seat beside him, patting him on the shoulder. He smiled reassuringly. Recovery girl finished operating on him around an hour ago. He hasn't woken up yet, but she said that it's good he's getting rest. Can we go in? Oh, sorry. She told me to wait for you here. He clapped his back once before pushing the boy's bangs out of his eyes. Izuku, do you want to talk about it? He looked away, towards the door again. No time like the present. It was horrific. They had a teleporter that separated us into the zones. Todoroki and I were together in the landslide zone. Hisashi nodded gently, encouraging him. We were attacked, but they weren't very skilled fighters. I'd guess pawns at best. One of them told us the main guy had a beast. A cheat code. When we reached the plaza, I saw Aizawa fighting off a mob by himself. The blonde gave him a waning smile. The main guy shredded his elbow, his quirk, I guess. The skin just disintegrated. The beast, it was terrifying. It moved faster than I could follow. Beat Aizawa into the ground. I just hope he was knocked out. I'd hate it if he was fully conscious that whole time. Midoriya was pulled into a side hug. He leaned into it, sighing shakily. Present my costume or no, the man gave great hugs. Anything else? The details have escaped me. Midoriya snorted into his shoulder. I kind of lost it. Ran in without a second thought. The main guy, Shigaraki, had the beast go after me. Looking back, I guess instincts took over, because I have no idea how I managed to avoid being crushed. Hisashi hadn't known that detail. He didn't outwardly react. Shigaraki tried using his quirk on me. I was dodging as much as possible, but that damn fountain. I fell. I made a stupid mistake and it could have cost me my life. If All Might hadn't arrived, Hisashi, I'm so sorry. Midoriya reached around the man, turning the half hug into a proper one. Present Mike rested his chin on the boy's fluffy hair. The door opened. He woke up. He demanded I allow you both in. Please make it quick, he needs to sleep. They were on their feet in seconds, rushing to Eraser's side. He was bandaged practically from head to toe. He breathed out softly in relief at the sight of a bandageless kid. Mick's hands hovered over him awkwardly. You can touch him, just don't aggravate any injuries, please. The blonde gently wrapped his arms around his husband. Midoriya felt like he was intruding on their moment. He averted his eyes. Aizawa's gruff voice startled him. Kid, come here. Are you okay? Midoriya rounded his bed, lowering himself onto the edge as softly as possible. I'm fine. Not really okay, but I could ask you the same. How are you under that mound of gauze? Aizawa's face was mostly obscured by bandages and Hisashi's long hair, but the look in his eyes put Midoriya at ease. Is the class okay? Bumps and bruises. More shaken mentally than anything else. The living mummy nodded once. His eyes flickered to the blonde above him. Aizawa, you didn't answer my question. Are you okay? I'm a pro hero, Midoriya. I'm trained for these scenarios. The boy furrowed his brow, looking away. That's not an answer. Hisashi nudged the man. He rolled his eyes. I'm in some pain, nothing I can't handle. So don't worry about it. Can't handle? You shouldn't have to handle it. I know you're a pro, but damn it, All Might was supposed to be there. 13 was there. There were 20 fresh-faced newbies. We don't have any experience in dealing with criminals. I don't have any experience in dealing with people. That shouldn't have happened. Hisashi and Aizawa shared a look. Kid, take a breath. It's fine. All Might was preoccupied saving people and overshot his timetable. 13 is a rescue hero, but they know what they're doing. You're news. You're students, yes. But you're all training to be heroes. You're going to have to fight villains and it's not going to be easy. Midoriya stood up, pacing in frustration. I know that. I know that I will have to fight, but that isn't supposed to be for another 3 years. I have learned nothing yet. None of us have. Your classmates will have to adjust to their new lifestyle. You all have a lot to learn. Forming emotional attachments this early on is irrational. Irrational? You're their teacher. You're supposed to be there for them. And me. They need me to teach them what will keep them alive when they graduate, Midoriya. I don't see how I could have such an impact on you all. I've had plenty of classes before and this has never been an issue. Because you mean something to them. They care about you and you're completely overlooking their feelings. How do you think they'd react if their teacher died? How can you be so nonchalant? The boy distantly realized he was basically giving his carer an earful on the exact topic Todoroki gave him earlier that day. Aizawa didn't respond. Midoriya felt himself go cold. I'm sorry. I'm frustrated and I'm taking it out on you. I'll leave you to it, Hisashi. He made to leave the room. Izuka dash. I'm fine. I'll be outside. He let the door close behind him. Midoriya? Detective Tsukachi, I helped Aizawa with your case? Midoriya looked up from the waiting room seats. It was only a few chairs, the same as their classrooms, lined up along the wall leading to Recovery Girl's office. Tsukachi, yeah, I remember you. It's good to see you again. What can I do for you? The man sat a seat down from him. He pulled out a notebook, a voice recorder and his laptop. I've been tasked with getting the student testimonies. If you're feeling up to it, do you mind if I ask a few questions? Midoriya sank into his seat. Might as well get comfortable. Go ahead, I'll answer as best as I can. Perfect, thank you. Firstly, can you describe what happened when you arrived at the unforeseen simulation joint? Midoriya glanced at the voice recorder. Well, when we walked in, 13 and AI Eraserhead started going over something. To be honest, I'm not really sure what they said. I was distracted. You are aware of my circumstances. My intuition rarely fails me. I just wasn't sure what to be on the lookout for. Tsukachi gave him an encouraging nod. A black and purple mist materialized out of nowhere, and I'd say a few hundred people appeared from it. The main guy, he was called Shigaraki Tamura by Kurojiri, the mist man, had a beast with him. The gnome. It was horrifying. It could move faster than the eye could see and went toe-to-toe with All Might longer than anyone else I've seen. Tsukachi paused in his writing. Some of your classmates reported that you fought off this creature. Is that true? Midoriya looked away from the detective's intense stare. That's a bit of an exaggeration. The Nomu had beaten down Eraserhead. I moved without thinking, and I ended up in a confrontation with the main guy and his superpowered pawn. I was mostly dodging. I barely did anything. Except maybe buy All Might enough time to arrive. Tsukachi rested his hands on his briefcase. Midoriya, that was incredibly brave of you to run in like you did to save your teacher. And you sustained no injuries? Midoriya snorted. Mental maybe. But I'm fine. Yeah, fine. He couldn't decipher the look the detective threw his way. Either way, he didn't want to look any further. He didn't want the detective to look any further. Can you tell me anything you found out about the villains that attacked your class? Well, most of them struck me as unskilled or cannon fodder. Todoroki and I were dropped in the landslide zone, and between the two of us kids, not one of the 30-odd intruders there laid a finger on us. Their main motivation seemed to be ending All Might, but they acted as more of a distraction than anything else. Tsukachi's pen ripped across the page of his notebook. It was strange, the leader threw a hissy fit when All Might didn't show, and yet the attack felt so coordinated. They knew when we would be there, and they knew All Might was supposed to be assisting the rescue training. They knew to scatter us because, even though we're untrained, It would be a nightmare to fight 20 students who managed to get into the UA hero course. They even knew who Eraserhead was. Tsukachi didn't look up from his notebook. It makes me wonder if an official document of some kind was leaked. Or stolen. Midoriya scratched his neck. Anyway, Shigaraki was the one giving orders, but I find it hard to believe he orchestrated that whole thing by himself. He also had some kind of disintegration power. Aizawa's elbow crumbled when he held it. Touch activated maybe. Kurogiri was the teleporter. He was way more in control than Shigaraki, but he went along with everything the others said. As for the Nomu? I honestly don't know. It didn't react when it saw Todoroki and me, but it attacked me when Shigaraki told it to. I assume it doesn't have conscious thought, but I could be wrong. Tsukachi finished his scribbling and shut his notebook with a flick. Anything else you'd like to say on record? No. Alright, thank you Midoriya. This information will help us immensely. Of course. Tsukachi clicked the voice recorder off. He looked at the door to Recovery Girl's office. So, how's Aizawa doing? Midoriya looked down at his feet. He's fine. Just as stubborn as ever. He'll probably be in a cast for a few weeks though. The detective nodded one last time, before making his exit. Midoriya followed him with his eyes. When the man turned a corner, he pulled out his phone. He responded to Shinso and Uraraka's messages, the same general questions. He sighed. His phone buzzed in his hands. Before he could think about it, he hit call. Holding the phone to his ear, he realized that it was probably a stupid idea. She was probably busy. Only enough time to shoot a message. He shut his eyes, squeezing his phone tighter. Hello? Are you okay, Izuku? He sniffed once, breathing deeply. I think so. Can you talk? I think I need a distraction. She chuckled lightly. Midoriya could feel himself brightening up. Of course. I can tell you all about my day. I had a half day at work, so I went over to an old friend of mine's. Midoriya lingered on her every word. He hummed every few minutes to let her know he was listening. Her voice was so familiar. So comforting. He wanted to be near her, just to feel the ring of light that seemed to follow her everywhere. Midoriya Inko had lost the light of her life, and yet she still brought so much light to others. He raised a faux finger to his eye, wiping away tears that never clouded his vision. The white of the hall was suddenly uncomfortably familiar. The plain, plastic seats and the plain, white doors. So clean, pristine. It was suffocating. Midoriya lifted himself up from the now unbearable chair, tripping over himself to reach the exit. Once his feet landed on the paved paths just outside the school doors, he realized that Inko was still talking. Inko? Sorry to cut you off. Can I come over? I really don't want to be at school right now. She stalled in the middle of her sentence. Oh, of course, come right over. Do you want me to call Aizawa or Yamada? No. I'll tell them. Thank you. Midoriya could picture her soft smile. It's absolutely fine. I'll see you soon. Midoriya hung up the phone, only hesitating for a second before sending a text to Hisashi about where he was going. A short walk and a train ride away, he was standing at Inko's doorstep. Midoriya knew it was rude of him to intrude on her evening like he was, but he has nowhere else to turn. He knocked thrice in succession. The gentle patter of steps reached his ears before the door was opened. There she stood, going about her day perfectly normally. Midoriya envied it. Come in. Can I get you something to drink? No, thank you. I'm fine. He'd been saying that a lot. She sat across from him, giving him a quick once-over. Is everything okay? He crumbled, folding over on himself. He distantly heard her cry out some exclamation. He was shaking with the force of his sobs. It was like a rubber band being pulled and pulled and pulled until it just snaps. He felt her tentatively wrap him up in a blanket and a hug, gently cradling the back of his head. He leaned into her shoulder, idly feeling guilty about the growing wet patch on her cardigan. Deep breaths. Can you try to follow my breathing? In and out, nice and slowly. I'm here, you can tell me whatever you'd like to. Once he could finally breathe normally again, he picked himself up and sat back on her couch. She didn't move from her seat beside him. I'm sorry. My class was attacked today. I doubt it's made the news yet. We were off campus, but Aizawa was there, 13 was there. But there were so many of them and they hurt him, but he doesn't care. The look on her face immediately made him feel even worse about dumping his emotional baggage on her. She grabbed him by the shoulders, pulling him into another hug. I'm so sorry that happened to you all. What's going on with Aizawa? That sounds unlike him. Midoriya sighed. I don't know, he's always going on about rationality and all that, but he's so stubborn and I don't know, he got really hurt today and he brushed me off for being concerned. She patted his hair, nodding. I see, and do you know why he acted the way he did? Midoriya scoffed. No, he hardly ever talks about himself. I asked him if he was okay and he ignored the question. And the last time we had a row, it was Hisashi that had to clue me into the fact that he's been through a lot. Maybe you should talk to him? I know he's closed off, but he probably has a reason to be. He cares about you, Izuku. I find it hard to believe that he's acting without good reason, and while that doesn't make it okay, it might clear a few things up for you. Midoriya nodded into her shoulder. I'm sorry, it was wrong of me to unload all my shit on you. He blanched when he thought over his words. She only giggled. I don't mind, I'm grateful you trust me with this. He looked at her for a moment. Inko? I think I need to talk to someone. She raised her eyebrows. Oh, like a professional. I promised you I'd think about it and I think. It couldn't hurt, anyway. She smiled softly at him. Would you like me to recommend people? I meet a lot of counselors as a nurse. He thought it over. Yeah, I'd like that. They stayed chatting for some time, only disrupted by a call from Hisashi. After a few hours, Midoriya decided he was probably overstaying his welcome. They said their goodbyes and exchanged a short hug. Midoriya shut the door behind him, turning to leave. He took a single step before realized there was another person there. He looked up from his sneakers, making immediate eye contact with Bakugo Katsuki. Oh shit. The blonde eyed him warily. The fuck are you doing here? Midoriya's brain stalled. I know Inko. Bakugo's glare got so much more intense. I fucking guessed that, dumb. How do you know her? It wasn't a question. More like a demand. Midoriya, very briefly, wanted to be petty, but that probably wouldn't lead to anything good. We're related. I've been visiting sometimes. That caused something to shift in the other's face. Of fucking course you are. Midoriya raised an eyebrow. Bakugo rolled his eyes and shouldered past him. I know about Akatani. The blonde stopped dead in his tracks. He glared over his shoulder at him. You told me you blame yourself, and for the longest time, I couldn't figure out what you meant. But I think I'm starting to get it. The blonde scoffed. You don't know jack shit. Don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong. Midoriya's blood turned to ice. He let any emotions he was feeling vanish. You think my family isn't my business? His voice was deadpan, completely and utterly cold. Bakugo's eyebrows twitched. No, I don't twist my fucking words. You fucking appeared only a few shitty months after the bastard died, and then you kept showing up everywhere I went. I thought I was losing my damn mind. The sludge villain, the final exams, you. It's like I'm being punished. Midoriya watched him, let him gather his thoughts. Bakugo huffed. I don't know you. I had no reason to attack you the way I did during the heroes and villains thing. My therapist said I have to take accountability for my stupid actions, so I've been visiting Auntie and shit. I'm sorry. It's okay. I should probably apologize to you though. I should have noticed that I made you so uncomfortable and stayed out of your way. So, I'm sorry. Bakugo looked anywhere but at him. Yeah, whatever. Midoriya threw him a lopsided smile. We may have gotten off on the wrong foot, but you're a passionate guy. I hope my presence doesn't become a detriment to your therapy. But, I think I'd like to be your friend, Bakugo. Red eyes met his briefly, before moving again. Yeah well, don't expect jack shit, I don't need your pity. I don't pity you, I'm being sympathetic. You are being pathetic, yeah? Midoriya snorted. Bakugo rolled his eyes. I'll see you in school. I hope you're doing okay after everything that happened today. Midoriya thought of the pure horror on the blonde's face when the Nomu tried to attack him. Bakugo looked in the middle distance. I should be saying that to you, Demas. The way you fought off that villain was impressive, but I'll still beat your ass. The green-haired boy raised an eyebrow. Sure, what? See you around? Bakugo turned back to Inko's door. Midoriya walked home. Hisashi? Aizawa? Midoriya, upon arriving home, was met by the attention-seeking love of his life, Chunk. She seemed aware of his turbulent emotions, and rubbed up against his legs purring. Hisashi stuck his head out from the kitchen. His hair was still gelled and styled. Izuku, I wasn't sure what time you'd be home. How was Inko? Are you okay? Midoriya steadied himself. She was okay and I will be. Is Aizawa home tonight or is he staying with Recovery Girl? He's in our room. She cleared him to go home but he's still head to toe in bandages. Speak of the devil, Aizawa ambled into the sitting room, still mostly bandaged. I'm fine, she was being paranoid. Midoriya watched him for a minute. Aizawa, I want to talk to you about earlier. The man's eyes were the only bits of his face visible, but Midoriya got the feeling he was raising his eyebrows. Shoot, kid. You brushed off my concerns today and it made me angry. I want to know why. Hisashi closed the door to the kitchen. But there's nothing to concern yourself with. Like I said, pros are trained for this sort of thing. I'm fine. Fine. Midoriya was starting to hate that word. Aizawa, you are bandaged from head to toe. I saw what happened. I know the Noma beat you down. It kept up with all might for longer than anyone else I've ever seen. You're going to sit there and tell me that that was something you were prepared for? There was a glint of something in Aizawa's eyes. Preparedness isn't something quantifiable, Midoriya. Obviously being injured isn't desirable, but as a pro I've been injured many times over. It comes with the territory. Midoriya held eye contact with him for a second. You know what, I think you're being irrational, Aizawa. Your quirk isn't suited to fighting large groups, yet you jumped in without waiting for backup. You had your elbow shredded by Handy Mandy, and you didn't employ the help of absolutely anyone. I had to jump in to stop the Nomo from bashing your skull in. So I think I reserve the right to be concerned. Midoriya heard Hisashi snort from the kitchen. Aizawa rolled his eyes. Pros have to run into situations that don't suit them all the time. How is this any different? You had 20 hero students and a rescue hero with you. If the teleporter hadn't scattered us all so quickly I might have been able to get us out of there with my portals. That is, if they decided to work with me. Aizawa blinked. Your portals aren't working? That was a bit of an exaggeration. You ran in without portals? Do you have any idea how reckless that was? Midoriya glared. You don't get to lecture me on recklessness. I'm working with a support student to figure out what's wrong. Aizawa, I'm allowed to worry about you. As much as you think you're above it, you need people who care about you as much as I do. Let me be concerned. Let me feel these emotions. I don't pity you, I respect you. Seeing you hurt makes me upset, so let me express that please. Let me care. Aizawa stared at him for a long minute. Fine. I'm sorry, Midoriya. Izuku. Please call me Izuku. Even though his face was mostly obscured, Midoriya got the sense that he was smiling. But good night, Izuku. Midoriya was falling again, only the sensation was different. He could hear someone talking, but he could only see the rushing walls fly past him. The occasional sign that was gone before he could read them. He shifted in his descent, only he had nothing to move this time. He tried, aimlessly, to move a hand, an arm, a leg. Nothing. He felt himself spin once more, and this time a figure came into view. Also falling, a bright orange jumpsuit. Brown hair. An Aperture Science handheld portal device. It was a much more primitive version of what he had been sporting. Held in a single hand, awfully heavy. Looking down the operational end of the device could end in burned retinas at best and brain damage at worst. A lot of Aperture Science technology could cause brain damage, now that he was thinking about it. The cool blue emancipation grills could liquidate your eardrums. The hard light bridges could set your hair on fire. The lasers could, well, it's pretty obvious. Needless to say, Aperture was not somewhere you would want to be if you were looking for comfort. Midoriya clued back in when he heard the voice again. How are you doing? Because I'm a potato. It took him a hot second to realize the voice, GLaDOS's voice, was coming from him. He was in a potato. More pressingly, he was GLaDOS. Could you maybe take off one of those Aperture Science long fall boots and stick me in it? Just be sure to land on one foot. Midoriya watched on as they fell, the girl looking him in the eye. Camera? Sensor? She was there before him in all her glory. Who else could it be but Chell, the one who defeated GLaDOS by herself and escaped the facility? With how Wheatley spoke of Potato GLaDOS and the mysterious, mute Chell, Midoriya could only assume he was staring at the myth, the one from the stories. The one in the creepy art Midoriya once found behind a misplaced panel, depicting both her, the portal gun and GLaDOS holding cake. He never knew how those drawings got there. Never got the opportunity to ask anyone. Alongside the empty cans of beans and the radios, Midoriya came to the realization that someone was hiding within the walls of Aperture Science while Chell was active. How this ghost of a person managed to hide from GLaDOS and all of her security. He had no idea, but you had to respect that kind of determination. He awoke with a startle as he prepared to hit the ground. Mashed potatoes. Huh, suck it, GLaDOS. He threw off his sheets, greeting Rhett and Wheatley. Hello. Good morning. How are you feeling, alright? I'm doing mighty fine myself, actually. You didn't ask, sorry, but you know, I thought I'd say. In case you were curious. Midoriya smiled and got ready for school. He ignored the sight of Shoyuta, still heavily bandaged, attempting to take a sip of his coffee. Hatsum? Are you there? Midoriya poked his head into the support labs later that morning. He'd been meaning to talk to her, preferably with good news about the state of his hands. 1 second. Wait there, I'll be out in a few. He had no idea where in the lab she was. Her voice was bouncing around the room so much she could have been literally anywhere. He strolled in, nodding to some of the other support students that he had been acquainted with after all of his visits. He stopped by Hatsum's workspace, eyes locking on the massive tarp that had been haphazardly thrown over a pile of something. Curious, he made his way over to it. From the outside, it was just a pile of assorted tech probably. As for why it was there in the first place? Still a mystery. He crouched, pulling up the tarp by one of the corners. Yep, piles of inventions and good quality stuff too. He went to draw it back further when Hatsum decided that scaring the shit out of him mere days after a brutal attack on his class was a good idea. No, leave it. He flinched so hard he fell back out of his crouch, grunting when his tailbone slammed into the hard flooring. She emerged from some nook in the lab, covered in enough soot to make a chimney sweep look clean. Hey, Greenie. Sorry I spooked ya, but this is top secret tech under here. I've been working round the clock to have the best babies to show off. The sports festival couldn't be coming at a better time. I've been so inspired lately, partially thanks to the weird-ass problems you've been coming to me about. The absolute best investors in the industry are invited every year, and I plan on securing a delicious deal. Midoriya blinked. A sports festival? Huh, I didn't think a day of activity would be something you'd be interested in. Hatsum stared at him like he'd said the sky was beige or water wasn't wet. Like he was stupid, basically. Back up, huh? He glanced to the side, trying to think if he'd said anything outlandish or weird. Just, I didn't take you for a sporty person, and what does your tech have to do with this? She kept staring. I honestly can't tell if you're being serious or not. His face pinched in confusion. Serious about what? Sports festivals are just not my thing. I was never really into that kind of thing as a kid. The UA Sports Festival. Yeah. As in the sports festival that's streamed in the 100 millions internationally, costs a small fortune to see in person, where all the heroes go to scout sidekicks and all the tech giants go to scout engineers. Where all the classes have equal opportunities to show off to the whole fucking world. That sports festival? Midoriya had a mild suspicion that he was missing something. Yeah. She practically balked at him. You're serious? You are actually serious? What the hell? How the genuine, actual, serious fuck have you never heard about it? Midoriya's brain blue-screened. Don't follow pop culture? His smile was so strained you'd swear he was in massive amounts of pain. She looked incredulously at him. What the fuck? I don't know what to say. You are honestly one of the most confusing people I've ever met. He shrugged, trying to get her attention off of him for any amount of time. About my hands? She snapped out of it pretty quickly, despite her very obvious shock. Oh, yeah, I think I've figured out the problem. Also, I don't know what kind of quirk you have that your hands contain so much data, but holy shit, dude. He shrunk a little. She didn't seem to notice. He was dragged back to her workspace. Both of his hands rested flat on the tabletop. She typed her password into her computer, fingers tearing across the keyboard. A few taps and clicks later, he was looking at what could only be described as an X-ray of his hands. The inside of his hands. He stared, transfixed. There was so much going on. So much to see. Wires, overlapping and tangling endlessly. Circuit boards and complex systems he couldn't even hope to understand. It's crazy, some of the most detailed work I've ever seen. She was staring just as intensely as he was. He could see the articulated joints, the pseudobones, and he could even see where machinery met flesh. Do you see what's causing the problem? She nodded, pointing to a single circuit board, one in each hand. If he looked close enough, he could see they were different from the rest, the only things that looked out of place. It has to be that. Everything else here, it's practically perfect. I can't believe that this just happened inside of you. Look, there's what looks like a little decal inside of your hand. How the hell did that get there? It's so cool. Midoriya didn't answer. He didn't even know what he could possibly say to answer that. That little decal looked suspiciously like an aperture. As in, Aperture Science's logo. The idea that that might be permanently inside him made his stomach turn. He swallowed. So, how do you fix it? She hummed. I can't say for certain. I don't think I'd be able to get in there with solder. It looks too delicate a job. I could try small shocks to see if it would realign itself, but it might hurt a bit. He shrugged. If it'll get my portals working again, I couldn't care less how much it hurts. She smiled, running off to grab whatever baby she intended on using to fix it. As it turned out, it didn't hurt. At all. Midoriya's issue is that it was probably supposed to. He saw how Hatsum grimaced every time she clicked on the machine, clearly anticipating a pain-related reaction. He didn't know if it would be better to pretend or to keep the same level of unresponsiveness. He chose the latter. After the fifth resounding shock, this one he actually felt shoot up his arms, she took the pseudo-electrodes off of his palms, letting him flex his fingers. He watched his hand contort and shift into a portal gun. It certainly didn't feel worse, that's for sure. The fact that the last shock stung up to his shoulders probably meant he should have been reacting earlier, even just to let her know that he felt it. He aimed at the wall, letting loose a blue portal. It landed. He cast the orange portal on the far wall. The portals linked, snapping open. Thank fuck they work. Hatsum pulled out the same weird reader device she'd used before and scanned his arm's forearm down. After a brief computing break, new copies of the X-rays appeared on the monitor. She zoomed in on the same circuit boards. They look good. I think they slotted back where they were supposed to be. See, if I compare the other scans to these ones-its in a different position, maybe double-check they do everything they're supposed to, just to be sure. He nodded, walking over to the portal. He stuck his hand through, watching it stick out on the other side of the room. He let the portals shut, looking around for something the right size. Upon finding a box seat around 2 feet by 2 feet, he used a function he hadn't so much as thought about in months. The box lifted up off the ground as if it were weightless. His handgun whatever's gravity nullification was working fine. He watched, amused, as Hatsum reacted. And boy did she react. Whoa, what? Hold on, I need my notebook. Before he could blink, he was sitting across from her as she fired questions at him. How does that function work? Does it cancel gravity or just work against it? Can you control the weight limit? Is it limited by time? Tell me everything. Whoa, take a breath. I don't really know much about it, to be honest. It does have a weight limit, I'm just not sure what it is. As far as I know, there's no time limit. Your question about the actual gravity side of it? I haven't the slightest idea. Sorry. She scribbled the few answers he could give at a lightning pace. Incredible. Why didn't you tell me you could do that? Is there anything else you can do? My legs? I guess. Her eyes snapped up to his with an intensity he wasn't expecting. Your legs? Yeah. Shock absorption. I lack bones. I drank bone-extracting juice. She snorted. May I have a look? He pulled up the leg of his school pants. Her eyes trailed the lines of black against the stark white. The curves and edges of his prosthetics that let him stop a Nomu punch in one move. Shock absorption? Mind explaining that to me? Sure, as long as I land on my feet, I can basically fall from any insane height you can think of. I've never reached its upper limits, and trust me when I say I've looked for those limits. Fascinating, what happens to the absorbed kinetic energy? That gave him pause. I'm not sure, actually. She held up her scanner again. May I? He nodded. After taking an internal photograph of his inhuman lower legs, she looked up at him again. I have an idea for your legs, but it would depend completely on my abilities as an inventor. I'll get back to you when I've run the numbers, but I think you'll like what I'm thinking of. Midoriya snorted, smiling. The humor drained slowly as he noticed the bags under her eyes after she took off her goggles. Hatsum, have you been sleeping enough? Eating meals that aren't instant flaming hot noodles? What? Of course I've been eating better than that. Yesterday I drank 2 energy drinks for lunch. Midoriya blinked. You can't possibly have thought that's better than what I said? She shrugged. Midoriya looked at the clock on his wall. Wheatley had been lightly teasing him about his constant checking of the clocks. Midoriya thought he was being diligent. Rhett betrayed him. Hey, I have to run, but I'll see you later? Please try to eat a vegetable. She nodded, lying on top of the tarp covering her babies. Midoriya threw open the door to the staff room without hesitation. Kiyama gave him a smile and a wave despite his visible fury. Hisashi, Shoyuta, you sons of bitches? Kiyama proceeded to choke on her coffee, laughing. A lanky man with wild blonde hair watched on, very confused. Snipe instinctively aimed his gun. Hisashi poked his head up from the other side of the room. Shoyuta sat up on the couch, engulfed in his bandages and sleeping bag. Hisashi pouted. Hey, don't call my mother a bitch. What the fuck is the sports festival, and why was I never told about it? Kiyama positioned herself next to him, running a hand through his fringe. Oh dash, how did we never think of that? Hisashi snorted. Internationally acclaimed and praised televised event. The kids get to show their stuff and get attention early on. Why would UA broadcast a bunch of kids showing off their powers? Is that not, like, counterintuitive if criminals could happen upon that information? Aizawa shrugged. Maybe it doesn't make sense, but these games overtook the Olympics decades ago. Midoriya felt the air leave his lungs. The Olympics? How is that even possible? It dawned on the 3 adults, in that moment, that Midoriya had watched the Olympics in his day, and was probably astounded that its popularity was overtaken by a high school sports festival. Shoyuta cleared his throat. I'm honestly not sure. I guess people preferred to see quirks in action over genuine athletic abilities after quirk laws were passed. Over time, people probably just forgot about them. Midoriya shrunk. That's wildly disappointing. Hisashi gave a crooked smile. Sorry, little listener, that's probably a bit weird to hear. I can explain it if you want. Midoriya shrugged again. The sports festival has 3 main events, with an hour of fun and games between the second and third rounds. First event is usually an opportunity for the other class groups to show their abilities. The second round is usually a team game, and the third round is always one-on-one fights. It's an important event in the school calendar because it's followed by the first-year internships, and the pros watching can submit internship offers. Plus, it's a great chance for students in Gen Ed to prove they deserve a spot in the hero course. Midoriya glanced over to Shoyuta, their conversation from months ago in Kiyoshi Ward shopping mall coming back into his head. If Gen Ed wasn't an option, I wouldn't have gone to UA. That's really cool. Does that happen often? Hisashi shrunk. No, but it depends on the year. Sometimes students try 4 other hero schools if they fail the UA entrance exam over entering Gen Ed. Like Shiketsu or Ketsubutsu. Midoriya nodded. Man, this stuff never gets boring. Kiyama chuckled to herself, pulling him into a side hug. Problem child, the bell is going to go soon, you should head to class. He glanced to the clock in the room. Yeah, I don't want Ida yelling at me again for almost being late. Kayama released him, and he gave a nod to his guardians before leaving the way he came. He ignored the feeling of eyes on him. He didn't want to think about it. Midoriya didn't even try to hide his entrance. Ida, thankfully, was preoccupied asking Tokoyami to stop sitting on the tables. Revelry in the dark. Tokoyami, you've said that 3 times now and I'm still not sure what you mean. Would you please stop sitting on the desk? The raven boy looked up from his clenched fist, meeting Ida's eye. Revelry in the dark. Midoriya smiled lopsidedly as Shuji tried and failed to cover his laugh. He walked to his seat with no issue, sending Bakugo a nod of acknowledgement. The blonde rolled his eyes, but raised a hand in a sort of half-assed wave. Shinso poked him in the back the second he sat down. Midoriya spun around and glared at him exaggeratedly. The insomniac stuck his tongue out at him. Midoriya caught Todoroki's gaze. They shared a moment of eye contact before turning away simultaneously. Uraraka smiled at him as she walked in after a few minutes, unfortunately being seen and admonished by Mr. Class President. Midoriya could feel the forced normality in the air as his classmates conversed and gossiped amongst themselves. It was like they were actively trying to avoid thinking about the USJ. Not that he blamed them. He looked over his classmates again, noticing the occasional strained smile or forced laugh. Even Shinso was staring at his hands pensively. He also made eye contact with Bakugo. He raised an eyebrow. Oi nerd, when the villain bastards attacked us, the muscular prick went after you. Midoriya blinked. Yeah? Bakugo just looked at him for a second. How the hell did you block its hits? It busted up Sensei and went at it with all might for like 5 minutes straight. He was shocked, to be honest. Bakugo was genuinely asking him a question about his abilities. I'm not giving away all my secrets just yet, but I appreciate your curiosity. The other's eyes narrowed. Was that too much? His thoughts were disturbed when Bakugo snorted, facing his table again. I'll still beat you, secret or no secret. Midoriya smirked to himself. I'd like to see you try. Their little conversation was cut off by Shoyuta slamming the door open. The class quietened out of habit, only to burst out in whispers as the mummy man made his way to the podium. Kaminari seemed to be the only one interested in speaking loud enough to be heard. Seriously? I thought we'd get a substitute or something. Jairu and Kirishima nodded in agreement. Are you all right, Sensei? I truly hope you are recovering well and that you are well rested. Thank you, Ida, but I'm fine. I've been cleared by Recovery Girl and I have been sleeping. Midoriya called bullshit. Shoyuta avoided his gaze completely. I know you have all had a rough few days, but the real trouble is only beginning. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Midoriya was waiting in anticipation for it to snap like a rubber band. Because the UA Sports Festival is next week? The class broke out in cheers, the heavy fog of tension dissipating instantly. This is your chance to prove yourself worthy of your places in this course, so work hard and stay focused. And have fun. Remember, there will be thousands of professional heroes watching and observing your abilities. If they like what they see, you might be offered an internship. That is what you're working towards. Establish good relations now and it might come in handy down the line. The bell rang, signaling the start of lunch, and Shoyuta was sound asleep in his sleeping bag before anyone could move. The excited looks on his class faces were nothing compared to Uraraka's. She was exuding pure determination. It was a little scary. Kaminari squeaked in surprise when he opened the classroom door. Midoriya did a double take. There was a crowd. That was putting it lightly. There was more than 20 students, presumably all first years, hanging around waiting for them. A blonde with striking blue indigo eyes stepped to the front, looking around the class with a smug look on his face. Midoriya could instantly tell this wasn't going to go well. If it isn't the legendary class, 1A? Midoriya rolled his eyes. Shinso snorted next to him. You are standing at our door, why are you acting surprised to see us? The blonde glared at the insomniac, who threw up his hands in a pseudo-placating way. Seems the media is absolutely eating up the story of the brave hero hopefuls, attacked on school property by a band of villains. The smug look intensified. Midoriya felt something bad coming. Aren't you ungrateful lot lucky? Suddenly, everyone is paying attention to you all. Are we not deserving of that same attention? Us poor, lowlives in Class B? The green-haired boy thought of him and Todoroki free-falling from a height. Dropped into a death trap they were lucky they could defend themselves from. He thought of the Nomu, all rippling muscles and no conscious thought of its own. A boy with silver hair and big eyelashes popped up from somewhere in the crowd. Monoma, come on man. What? I'm just saying, they don't exactly look deserving of the attention they're getting. He thought of Shoyuta, his teacher, his guardian, his friend, having his head slammed into concrete over and over and over. He thought of Shigaraki, disintegrating all he touched. He thought of the cold fear he felt when the Nomu turned on him. Midoriya had heard enough. Lucky? The blonde's attention landed on him. The smug look returned full throttle. Lucky, that's what you said? Monoma raised an eyebrow. Midoriya adjusted the straps of his bag and stalked over to the door. Lucky to get out without injury? Lucky to got out at all. Are you implying that we're lucky to have been attacked? His voice was like stone, icy cold. Monoma reacted for only a second, but it was enough for Midoriya to know he was surprised. All I'm saying is that you all are being cheered on. Are we, your classmates, not deserving of that too? Monoma was trying and failing to make him look like the bad guy. If it's attention you want, save it for the festival, Monoma. I am not here to deal with your inferiority complex. Midoriya shoved past him, checking him on the shoulder. He heard Bakugo snickering as he turned the corner. He collapsed against the wall the second he was out of view. Where the hell did that confidence come from? He ran a mechanical hand through his hair, tugging on the ends. He needed food and an iced tea if he was going to think about that conversation in the next 20 minutes. Hey Shinso, do you want to train together tomorrow? I could do with some extra sparring practice. Oh sure. Midoriya raised an eyebrow at his friend as they walked out of the school. You okay? Shinso held his gaze for a moment. Can I confess something? Nothing weird, just, I think I need to say it. Midoriya looked at his friend, concerned. Shinso? I shouldn't be here. He was taken aback. Shinso spoke with such conviction. What? I shouldn't be in the hero course. I probably shouldn't be in this school at all. Whoa, hold on. You're going to have to explain what you mean. Shinso glared at the ground. I didn't get any villain points in the entrance exam. I couldn't beat a single robot. You shouldn't beat yourself up about that. The exam wasn't fair in the first place. Let me finish, please. Midoriya tilted his head. Okay. The only reason I got any points at all is because you told me what to do. And the funniest thing is, that wasn't even the worst of it. I didn't get in because I passed. I got in because I took someone else's place. Some kid with sexual assault claims against him was supposed to be in my seat, but his karma came back to bite him in the ass. They told me all that in my acceptance letter. How is it fair that I'm surrounded by hero students when I didn't do enough to pass in the first place? Shinsu's voice had gotten steadily more shaky and bitter as he spoke. He scrubbed angrily at his eyes. Damn it. Shinso, did you want to vent or would you like my thoughts? Shinso glared at nothing. I don't know. Midoriya pursed his lips. Shinso, you deserve your place in this class. The circumstances of your acceptance be damned, you've worked hard to get here. You still got points and you earned them. I didn't tell you how to get points, just that you could. You acted like a hero, Shinso, and the universe rewarded you. You did enough, you don't have to prove that to us, or anyone else. You're completely valid in what you're feeling, but can I ask if this is about that guy earlier? Shinso wouldn't look at him. I was useless at the USJ. All I could do was keep the bastard villains at bay. Kaminari had to carry me back to shore because I fucked up my brain. You, Bakugo, Todoroki. You all helped. Even before that, during the hero and villain training. Yaoyorozu did all the work and I just sat there. How have I earned my place in this class when I'm surrounded by people who've worked harder than me? Midoriya pulled him into a hug. I'm sorry. I'm sorry we've been through so much shit in the last 3 weeks. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. But listen to me, if you didn't deserve your spot here, you wouldn't still be here. Eraserhead expelled his entire class last year. Do you think he's keeping all of us around for kicks? He sees our potential and he knows we all have our own abilities. You deserve to be here, Shinso. The same as everyone else in our class. Admittedly, Midoriya had felt like a bit of a fraud himself. He had Shoyuta and Hizashi to tell him what to do, even unintentionally. He got lucky with the environment of the entrance exam, and he'd been training with Shoyuta, a pro hero. At the USJ, he hadn't saved his guardian, he could have gotten himself killed. All he did was put himself in danger and drew the attention of Shigaraki onto himself. What if that led to resentment down the line? What's done is done, but he still had regrets. Regrets are basically a condition of being human. Shinso, I don't know what you've been going through, but I can understand some of what you mean. We just have to keep working so we can prove ourselves to our own brains, you know? The insomniac nodded into his shoulder. Midoriya? This is a really long hug. Oh, sorry. I should have asked first. Shinso had a small smile on his face. It's okay, and thank you, Midoriya. He grinned, all teeth. I'm always happy to help out my friends. So is 5 a good time for you tomorrow? The purple boy nodded. Todoroki was prepared for the festival, that was never in question. Endeavor made sure of it, the bastard. The feeble week off the students had to prepare for the sports festival was less than satisfactory, in Endeavor's eyes, to train him further. The week off was supposed to be an opportunity to rest up and do some last-minute exercise, not spend every night leading up to the festival panting, half-collapsed in exhaustion and pain. But Endeavor didn't care, oh no. His masterpiece needed refining. Last-minute corrections to iron out the last few errors. Todoroki's muscles ached as he pulled himself out of bed, the morning of the world-renowned UA Sports Festival. It would pass long before the event started, but it served as a reminder of his failure in the number 2 hero's eyes. Failure to what exactly? Todoroki wasn't sure. Not using his fire maybe? That was his choice. It felt like an act of rebellion in itself, making a choice for himself. Enji didn't care for choice when it came to his children. He was uncompromising. Perhaps he could have done something else to rebel, like dye his hair or pierce his ears. Not acknowledging his fire seemed to work well, though. Plus, he couldn't bear the thought that he reminded his mother of him. Todoroki stretched out his neck as he passed Fuyumi in the kitchen. She didn't mention the fact that he was in the training room all night. He didn't mention the redness of her eyes. They ate breakfast in silence. Please be careful today, Shudo. The last thing I want is for you to get hurt. He nodded. And that was the end of that. The waiting room they shoved all of 1A into was a bit cramped for the 20 students, but no one else seemed to mind. Kirishima was laughing with Kaminari, showing off rows of razor-sharp pearly whites. He'd be easy enough competition, Todoroki thought. Close-range fighters didn't tend to fare well against long-ranged quirks. While Kirishima was probably physically stronger than him in combat, Todoroki wasn't worried about him in terms of raw power. He could freeze him in an instant. His eyes were drawn to Ida. Speed, that would be tough to beat. He'd have to rely on his reflexes, but there wasn't much Ida could do if he couldn't move his legs. Again. He looked over at Yaoyorozu. She could be a problem. The ability to create anything, a fellow recommendation student. She could create some kind of antifreeze, probably. Or a flamethrower. He thought of her past fights and other times he had seen her using her quirk. She mostly stuck to metal weapons and traps. She probably wouldn't be able to counter him on the fly. He glanced at Ishido. Acid. That could be a big problem. He hadn't the slightest clue how her acid would affect his ice. He'd have to take her down as fast as possible. He wasn't going to take any risks with unknown factors. Speaking of unknown factors, Midoriya was standing, chatting with Shinso and Uraraka. Now there was a big unknown. Todoroki wasn't fully sure what his quirk even was, let alone its limitations. With how freely Midoriya used his portals, it didn't seem like there were any limitations. No noticeable ones, anyway. Not to mention his legs. Todoroki thought back to the Nomu, all hulking muscles and exposed brain. The walking nightmare shattered the concrete it landed on, yet couldn't put a scratch on Midoriya when it punched him outright. How could a quirk that powerful not have come from some pro-hero lineage? Todoroki didn't know any teleportation-specific heroes off the top of his head. He couldn't think of the last time he'd even heard of a teleportation quirk, aside from the mist villain at the USJ. Needless to say, it wasn't very common. What bothered Todoroki was that the ability to create portals and shock absorption aren't at all related. At least with his own quirk, fire and ice were both elemental powers. With Midoriya though? It didn't even seem like he had approached the extent of his power. Todoroki's gaze hardened into a glare. Midoriya had been kind to him, he wasn't blind to that. But his old man would be watching, and Midoriya would be the perfect way to show that he didn't need the bastard's fire. And he wasn't here to make friends. Clearing his head of the memories of their talks, both in and out of the USJ, he looked back to Midoriya. He took a few steps forward. Shinso, another competitor to keep an eye on, looked at him over Midoriya's shoulder. Uraraka stalled in her story. "Midoriya," said boy turned to him, an eyebrow already raised. He smiled when he saw him. It made him mildly regret his decision, but he had something to prove. Friendship would get in the way. He ignored the sickening feeling in his gut. Todoroki noticed the room around them quietening. He ignored the curious stares. "Todoroki? What's up?" He took a breath. "No turning back now. Objectively speaking, I think I'm stronger than you." He saw Bakugo's gaze burn into him from the corner of his eye. Midoriya didn't say anything. "I'll beat you today. Don't think I won't." Midoriya looked at him incredulously. "Okay? We didn't make a bet, no need to be so formal about it." Todoroki narrowed his eyes. His fists instinctively clenched. That wasn't how this conversation was supposed to go. As if sensing his rising anger, Kirishima let out a forced laugh, holding up his hands. "Whoa dude, come on now. We all want to win, don't single out my man Midoriya." Todoroki batted Kirishima's hand away from his face. "Why can't he be angry at me? Give me something to fight against. Take me seriously." He glared with the heat of 1,000 burning suns. "Midoriya is a threat. I didn't come here to make friends and I have things I need to prove. Watch your back." The green-haired boy was openly staring at him with an indescribable look on his face. It only added to his mounting anger. Midoriya turned away. Todoroki walked back to his seat. Little did he know, Todoroki thought. He'd figured him out. Just to wait for a chance to confront him. "You okay? What an ass, insulting you like that." The green-haired boy's gaze landed on Shinso. "Come on, don't talk like that." The insomniac looked at him vengefully. "What? He can't get up on his high horse just because he was born with the perfect quirk. Elitism, that's what that is. I could knock him out in a second, but he doesn't seem to care about me. Or Uraraka. What good could he do if he couldn't keep his feet on the ground, huh?" He couldn't exactly disagree with the sentiment. He didn't really know Todoroki well enough to dispute it. It was a pretty well-known fact that Todoroki was crazy powerful, but elitist? It didn't quite fit. Oblivious, maybe. He sighed. Uraraka's gaze was on Todoroki's back. She had a righteous fury burning in her eyes. Midoriya realized he was upset after he stopped paying attention to the half-and-half boy. He thought he'd made a connection with Todoroki, back at the USJ, but apparently not, he thought bitterly. Whatever, let him push people away, see what he cared. No, that's not healthy, come on Izuku. He was just irritated. Who gave Todoroki the right to write off the rest of their classmates? Only singling himself out as a threat? That wouldn't bode well with everyone else, he knew that for sure. These people, they all had things to prove. He thought of Shinso, wanting to feel like he'd earned his place. He thought of Uraraka, who wanted to earn enough to support her parents and be able to eat without worrying where the money for the next meal would come from. He thought of Ida, who wanted to impress his brother, his biggest source of inspiration, and live up to his family name. He thought of Bakugo, a deeply traumatized child who was forced to look in the face of a boy long gone every time he went to school, who was dealing with his mental health in the best way he knew how, while also proving his strength to himself and his classmates. He sighed again. It wasn't fair on all of them that Todoroki didn't see them as competition. Midoriya just wished he knew what the other boy was thinking. He was pulled back to the present when Shinso booped his shoulder to get his attention. They were being escorted to the main field. Shinso? What's your plan for this? I was kind of conflicted. I want to go underground, so obviously making a big show today was out, but I want also to show people that non-offensive quirks are still heroic. I'm not completely sure I made the right choice, but Aizawa offered to take me on for the week of internship. So I'll get to a comfortable spot and then I'll dip. Midoriya nodded. Shinso raised an eyebrow at him. I have no idea how I want to play this. Fight for the spotlight or play it safe? Shinso shrugged, smiling lopsidedly. He smiled back. Midoriya could feel the growing excitement among his class. Their cheers and laughter was a refreshing sound, especially considering what they had just been through. When the class emerged from the concrete tunnel, Midoriya was confronted with the sight of over 20,000 people, all watching them with avid curiosity and anticipation. And that wasn't even everyone who would be paying attention either. People all over the globe would be watching this. Midoriya saw Hatsum standing with her fellow support students. She must have spotted him as well because she threw him a lazy wave. The Gen Ed groups didn't look happy to be announced after the hero courses. Midoriya didn't blame them. He knew their class was getting media coverage because of the attack. People didn't seem to realize that the attention was not at all good. A group of criminals breaking into one of the most secure and protected grounds in all of Japan? Not good news for the public opinion of the school. When he thought about it, they were lucky that there were only 1 or 2 powerhouses in terms of the abilities at the disposal of the intruders. Shigaraki, Kurogiri. Noma. A lot of people were criticizing UA, after that, for being unsafe. He had largely avoided the news for the first few days after the attack. Midoriya didn't want his class to be made an example of. He zoned back in as Kayama walked out onto the platform, dressed to the nines. In full hero costume. Midoriya smiled to himself. He briefly tuned in to hear Tokoyami tell Kirishima and Kaminari that she usually hosted the third year's sports festival. But everyone's eyes were on the first years. The first year group in school history to ever have a class be attacked on school property. He didn't linger on the thought. Midoriya assumed Nizu requested Midnight host because of her innate ability to control a crowd. As if proving his point, she waved a hand over her head, commanding the audience's silence. Welcome to the annual UA Sports Festival. I have here in front of me all of the wonderful first-year students currently in attendance. Will you all give them a big round of applause? That's it, give them a hand. She made a display of her own clapping, pointedly toward his class. Cheers erupted from the stands. Midoriya was in awe of the bouncing voices. So many people here just to see them. It must have been the most people he'd seen in one day after Aperture. All of them, cheering them on. It made him feel warm. Midnight cleared her throat and the crowd went quiet almost instantly. Now, before we get into the events, let us first hear a speech from a student representative. Bakugo Katsuki, who came first in the entrance exam, please come up to the stage. Please give this young man a bit of encouragement. Midoriya watched Kirishima pat the blonde's back as he passed. Bakugo didn't look happy about the speech. Midoriya was not envious of him at all. He guessed the blonde would rather consume a tablespoon of cinnamon powder dry than give a very public, very highly viewed speech. Midnight gestured to the microphone as Bakugo strolled past her. To be frank, he had absolutely no hope for whatever was about to come out of the blonde's mouth. Hey, I already know I'm lucky to be here. Midoriya blinked in surprise. That was certainly not what he was expecting. And I know the rest of these guys are as well. I want to win. Not just for myself. I know they have things to fight for as well. So, give me all you've got. Come at me with all of your strength. I want to have the most satisfactory win possible, or... Midoriya watched on closely as the boy paused. It took him a second to work up the nerve to finish his sentence. Or lose to a worthy opponent. Plus ultra or whatever. The onlookers went absolutely wild. Midoriya heard himself cheering before he realized he too was applauding. Bakugo met his eye from the stage. He grinned at him earnestly. The blonde looked away, a small smile hidden from the cameras, on his face. He quickly descended the stairs once more. Once the crowd calmed again, Midnight smiled and threw her arm in an arc towards them. How riveting! Nothing wrong with a bit of healthy competition among friends. Now, on to the main event. There will be 3 rounds for all our contestants to show off their stuff. Our first trial will be... She paused for dramatic effect. A giant hologram of a slot machine spun and spun and spun behind her. It ground to a halt on the word obstacle. An obstacle race. In this round, students are challenged with a free-for-all race around the outer arena. Of course, it won't be that easy. They must face a series of traps and, obviously, obstacles as they go. First back gets a special bonus for the second round. Any questions? When none of the students raised a hand, she nodded and dramatically flipped an arm towards the exit gate. The very small exit gate. Midoriya felt a sardonic smile form on his face. Naturally. The first obstacle? Getting past the gate. Ready? And on your marks, get set, Gio. The massive crowd of teenagers made a mad dash for the concrete tunnel. Midoriya could hear Hisashi and Shoyuta commentating. How Hisashi managed to wrangle his husband into doing that, he had no clue. Either way, he had a plan to execute. Was it flawless? Would he win this round? Also no. Could it backfire? Absolutely. And so, Midoriya stood stock still as the contestants around him ran ahead. He felt the chill of Todoroki's quirk up ahead. He probably froze the other competitors, he thought. An effective strategy, just not a very nice one. He heard the boom of explosions, the cracking of ice, and the screaming of Hisashi Yamada. What talent! Check them out, all of Class 1A managed to dodge Todoroki's chilly trap. What are you teaching these kids, Hi Racerhead? Midoriya snorted. Shoyuta was probably completely out of his element. I didn't teach them any of that. These kids have faced some unimaginable struggles. They taught themselves how to think under pressure. The deadpan delivery was irrationally hilarious to the teen. By the time Present Mike had finished narrating Todoroki's every move, the tunnel had cleared of students, with Midoriya standing by himself at the very back of the pack. He took a breath. Okay, this better work, or I'm going to have some serious catching up to do. He aimed a portal gun hand at the wall of the tunnel he'd previously been leaning on, shooting a blue portal. It landed. He sighed in relief. He turned, eyeing the tunnel at the opposite side of the arena. The finish line. He zoomed in as much as his eyes would let him. He needed this portal to be as subtle and as carefully placed as possible. In other words, he didn't want his guardians to notice what he was up to. To be fair, they would eventually notice that he wasn't even remotely present for the race. Probably. He fired the orange portal, it opening about halfway down the tunnel. He smirked to himself. Perfect. Somewhere, deep in the red light district of Kamino Ward, Shigaraki sat tapping his finger against the counter of a bar. The seedy bar was not a particularly popular joint. No surprise there. He watched impatiently as their television's static gave way to the most televised event on the planet. The UA Sports Festival. Specifically, the first years. Kurogyari was stood behind the bar, endlessly polishing the collection of glasses they had, despite their comically low visitors. Behind Shigaraki, a computer screen flickered to life, displaying an error message, reading audio only. Brats, the lot of them. I lost my precious Nomo over them. And look, they're all smiling and cheering like nothing happened. A deep, booming voice came from the computer. Patience, Tamura. I am working closely with the doctor to create more toys for you to play with. 1A is the class you selected. Shigaraki growled. Yes. But they cheated. NPCs aren't supposed to be high-ranked. And All Might was supposed to die. A rough chuckle echoed throughout the bar. Now, let's not over-exaggerate. You anticipated facing some strong quirks. Endeavor's son was bound to cause problems. Not just that stupid NPC. The brat who gave the speech was too much for Kurogyari. And my Nomu couldn't even touch that green thorn in my side. Fascinating. What was this child's quirk, Tamura? Shigaraki clenched his fist around his glass. It was nothing but dust seconds later. I don't know. Some kind of shock absorption. He stopped to punch with nothing but his legs. The villain threw his stool at the wall. Kurogiri watched in disappointment when it smashed, breaking into pieces. Remain calm, Tamura. You can hurt this boy however you like, when the time is right. Shigaraki smiled from under a severed hand. He felt warm, thick blood leaking from the split in his lip. Itching, medicine-free hands. I will rip him to shreds. Midoriya was getting bored. He'd only been standing in the tunnel for a few minutes, but it felt like hours. Hisashi's commentary did wonders for his boredom, but it was mostly just him screaming about how Todoroki and Bakugo were neck and neck for the last 3 minutes. He just wished he had some way to entertain himself. Music. He heard music playing. Shoyuta and Hisashi hadn't realized he wasn't doing the obstacle course yet. Or at least, they hadn't said anything. It was eerily familiar music. He was thrust back to a room, devoid of personable items. Bland art on the wall and an automated voice broadcasting through the speakers. Aperture science. He could picture the radios as clear as day. A black and white half-circle. An antenna. An obnoxious glowing light. The only frequency it could pick up playing cheerless music for hours on end. Midoriya remembered early on in his aperture testing days, when he had desperately messed with every knob and dial he could find on the radio, looking for any other frequency. Any other channel. Any indication that a world still existed outside of GLaDOS and her tests. He remembered sobbing as he slammed the radio against the walls of his room cell, bashing it until the music stopped. And now it was playing again. He couldn't hear anything but the same cheerless, repetitive tune. He looked around the tunnel. Everything felt like it was moving in slow motion. Or like he was underwater. Nothing but tunnel and a blue portal. He went to push a hand through his messy, overgrown curls. But one finger felt some resistance. He brought the hand in front of his face. On the end of his index finger, on his right hand. There was a small antenna where the bud of his finger should be. He poked it with his other hand, watching it bend back before snapping back into place under his fingers. He needed the music to stop. Slowly, he wrapped his other hand around the antenna. And he tried to rip the antenna out. Right as he felt something start to give way, the glorious sound of silence flooded his senses. It stopped. He let himself fall to his knees, breathing heavily. Once he'd almost caught his breath, he raised his finger to his eyes. The antenna had gone back in. As in, back into his finger. The thought made him want to gag. Where had that come from? GLaDOS never said anything about putting a fucking radio in his goddamn plastic hands. He exhaled, letting his fury flow out with his breath. He needed to focus on the game now. He could have a crisis later. Midoriya slowly stood, signaling out the sensation of the ground beneath his feet. He turned back into Hisashi's voice. Look at these kids. Eraser, Todoroki and Bakugo have abandoned their strategies completely. Check it, they're duking it out for first place. He didn't bother listening to Shuta's response. He needed to be ready. He stood, poised in front of the blue portal, staring at the wall of the opposite tunnel. Portals were funny like that, breaking the laws of physics as they pleased. Or following them, Midoriya wasn't quite sure how GLaDOS operated. He saw the two boys sprint past his portal, too focused on the race to spot him. The second they cleared him, he dashed through at full speed, trying to ensure he get a good enough place. And first place goes to Todoroki Shudo. Second place goes to Bakugo Katsuki. Evidently, neither the commentators nor Kayama had noted his absence. Perfect chance to strut his stuff. He exited the tunnel, practically flying over the finish line. What's this? Third place to Midoriya Izuku. Where the hell did he come from? Language, Mike. Midoriya burst into a fit of giggles as he saw the crowd's eyes on him. He had let the portals close after he used them, so there was no evidence of what he'd done. Aside from maybe security cameras. He saw both Bakugo and Todoroki's gazes on him. He tried to smirk, but his giggles ruined the look he was going for as he threw Bakugo a lazy salute. The blonde snorted and moved on. Todoroki, however, did not. A few minutes later, the rest of the 40 students moving on to the next round had cleared the finish line, with Yaoyorozu coming in 4th, Uraraka coming in 5th, Ida coming in 6th, and so on. Aoyama just about made it through as the 40th to pass. Midnight cracked her whip fiercely as the students gathered again. Absolutely incredible. The skill, the talent, the spirited competition between classmates, the drama. Oh, where do I begin? The cheering from the audience lasted a little longer this time. Well, why waste time wondering what happened? Let's move on to the next round. And it will be... The massive hologram reappeared behind her. It spun and spun. Longer than the first time as well, before finally grinding to a halt on the word cavalry. A cavalry battle? This is how it will go down. 10 teams of 4, with riders and carriers, will be formed at your own discretion. Each member will receive a headband assigned with a value of points. Your objective? Gather as many points as you can. Top 4 teams will move on to the final round. Once the cheering had calmed once more, Midoriya noticed Yaoyorozu with her hand held high. Midnight seemed to notice right as Midoriya did. Miss Yaoyorozu, what can I help you with? She cleared her throat before speaking. I believe you said the winner of the last round would receive an advantage for this challenge, but you haven't said what it is exactly. The hero smiled devilishly. An excellent observation. That advantage pertains to the headbands I mentioned already. The person in last place will get a headband with 20 points on it. Next gets 40 and so on. The difference for the person in first place, however, is that they get 1,000,000 points. Midoriya could feel the atmosphere thicken around him. Everyone's eyes were on Todoroki, and none of them friendly. The 1,000,000-point headband is an automatic pass to the next and final round, so hold on tight. You'll be allocated 10 minutes now to sort out your teams. Get to it and choose wisely.